The black stallion's scream cut through the frozen air as the girl stumbled backward, blood dripping from her torn sleeve. Ryder Callahan stood in the barn doorway, his jaw clenched tight. He'd warned her. He'd made it crystal clear. Stay away from that pen. Stay away from the beast that had already taken one life. But Eliza Hart, the unwanted, overweight orphan they dumped on his doorstep with lies about her abilities, had crossed the line he'd drawn in the dirt. And now, everything was about to change. This is a story of survival, secrets, and second chances on the unforgiving frontier. Stay with me until the very end, hit that like button, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The wagon wheels groaned against the frozen ground, each rotation carrying Eliza Hart farther from everything she'd ever known and closer to a fate she couldn't imagine. She sat hunched in the back, her threadbare coat doing little against the November wind that sliced through the canvas covering. Her fingers were numb, her body aching from 3 days of relentless travel, but the physical discomfort was nothing compared to the fear gnawing at her insides. Mrs. Brennan, the sharp-faced administrator from the Westridge Charity House, sat across from her, lips pursed in that expression of permanent disapproval Eliza knew so well. The woman hadn't spoken more than a dozen words since they'd left town, and Eliza preferred it that way. Every time Mrs. Brennan opened her mouth, it was to remind Eliza of what a burden she'd been, how much money the charity house had wasted feeding her, clothing her, tolerating her presence. "We're almost there," the driver called back, his voice rough and weathered. "Callahan Ranch, just over that ridge." Eliza's stomach clenched. She peered through the gap in the canvas, catching her first glimpse of what would be her new prison. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving. Endless stretches of brown grass, skeletal trees bent by constant wind, and in the distance, a cluster of weathered buildings that looked as unwelcoming as the land itself. Mrs. Brennan finally spoke, her voice sharp as a knife. "You will work hard, Eliza. You will do exactly as Mr. Callahan instructs. You will not embarrass this institution with your usual laziness and incompetence. Do you understand?" Eliza nodded, not trusting her voice. Laziness, incompetence. The words stung because they were lies, but lies she'd heard so often they'd almost become truth in her own mind. She wasn't lazy. She'd scrubbed floors, washed laundry, and worked in the charity house kitchen from dawn until her hands cracked and bled. But she was slow, awkward, heavy. The other girls had made sure she knew it. The administrators had made sure she knew it. And now, apparently, Mr. Callahan would make sure she knew it too. "The contract is for 6 months," Mrs. Brennan continued, smoothing her skirts with gloved hands. "Mr. Callahan needs an experienced horse handler. We've assured him that you have the necessary skills." Eliza's head snapped up, her eyes wide with shock. "But I don't—" "You will learn," Mrs. Brennan cut her off, her tone brooking no argument. "Or you will fail. And if you fail, Eliza, there will be no charity house to return to. We cannot afford to feed girls who provide no value. You are 16 years old enough to earn your keep or face the consequences of your uselessness." The wagon lurched to a stop, and Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. Through the canvas, she could hear the sounds of the ranch, the distant whinny of horses, the creak of barn doors, the rhythmic thud of an axe splitting wood, and then footsteps. Heavy, deliberate, approaching. The canvas flap yanked open, and Eliza found herself staring at the most intimidating man she'd ever seen. Ryder Callahan stood well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders blocking out the gray sky behind him. His face was all hard angles, sharp jaw covered in dark stubble, a nose that had clearly been broken at least once, and eyes the color of storm clouds that seemed to look straight through her. He wore a battered hat pulled low, a heavy coat that had seen too many winters, and an expression that made it clear he didn't suffer fools. "This her?" His voice was deep, rough, and utterly devoid of warmth. Mrs. Brennan climbed down from the wagon with surprising agility for a woman of her years. "Mr. Callahan, may I present Eliza Hart. As discussed in our correspondence, she is an experienced stable hand with extensive knowledge of horse care and handling. I'm confident she will meet your needs." Ryder's eyes never left Eliza as Mrs. Brennan spoke. He studied her with the same critical assessment he might give a horse at auction, taking in her rumpled clothes, her trembling hands, the way she couldn't quite meet his gaze. Something flickered across his face. Doubt. suspicion, maybe even pity, though it was gone too quickly to be certain. "Get down," he said to Eliza, not unkindly, but not warmly either. Eliza struggled to climb out of the wagon, her legs stiff from days of sitting. She stumbled on the last step, barely catching herself before she fell face first into the dirt. Behind her, she heard Mrs. Brennan's sharp intake of breath, a sound of exasperation, not concern. Ryder's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. Instead, he turned to Mrs. Brennan. "The letter said she's worked with horses for 3 years. Quarter horses, specifically. Said she can handle difficult animals." "That's correct," Mrs. Brennan lied smoothly, her face betraying nothing. "Eliza has considerable experience. I'm certain you'll find her quite capable." Ryder's gaze shifted back to Eliza, and she felt like an insect under glass. "That true, girl? You worked with horses before?" Eliza opened her mouth, the truth forming on her tongue. She wanted to tell him that she'd never touched a horse in her life, that the closest she'd come to livestock was feeding chickens in the charity house yard, that Mrs. Brennan was lying through her teeth. But then she caught the administrator's warning glare, remembered the cold finality in her words. "There will be no charity house to return to." Eliza's voice came out as barely a whisper. "I've worked with animals, sir." It wasn't exactly a lie. She had fed chickens. Did that count? Ryder's eyes narrowed, and Eliza knew with sinking certainty that he didn't believe her. But Mrs. Brennan was already moving, producing papers from her bag, speaking in that brisk, efficient tone that discouraged questions. "The contract, Mr. Callahan. 6 months of service in exchange for room, board, and a small stipend to be paid upon successful completion. The charity house asks only that you provide adequate supervision and ensure she fulfills her duties." Mrs. Brennan thrust the papers at Ryder, along with a pen. "Sign here, please." Ryder didn't take the pen immediately. Instead, he looked at Eliza again, his expression unreadable. "What's your name?" "Eliza Hart, sir." "You know anything about ranching, Eliza Hart?" Eliza's throat felt tight. She wanted to be honest, wanted to tell him the truth, but Mrs. Brennan's presence behind her was like a knife at her back. "I'm willing to learn, sir." Something in Ryder's expression shifted. Not quite approval, but perhaps the absence of immediate dismissal. He took the pen from Mrs. Brennan and signed the contract with quick, decisive strokes. The scratch of pen on paper sounded like a judge's gavel, sealing Eliza's fate. 6 months, Ryder said, handing the papers back. "If she can't do the work, the contract's void." Mrs. Brennan's smile was thin and satisfied. "I'm certain that won't be necessary. Eliza understands what's expected of her." She turned to Eliza, her voice dropping to a tone only the girl could hear. "Do not disappoint us. You have no other options." Then, without another word, without even a goodbye, Mrs. Brennan climbed back into the wagon and signaled the driver. The wheels began to turn, carrying her away from the ranch, leaving Eliza standing in the cold wind beside a stranger who already regretted taking her in. Ryder watched the wagon disappear over the ridge before turning to Eliza. "You lied to me." It wasn't a question. Eliza's face burned with shame, but she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Mrs. Brennan lied to you, sir. I didn't—" "You stood there and let her," Ryder interrupted, his voice hard. "Same thing in my book." Eliza had no defense for that. She dropped her gaze to the ground, waiting for him to tell her to start walking back to town, to get off his property, to disappear. Instead, Ryder sighed, a heavy, weary sound that spoke of too many disappointments and not enough help. "Winter's coming. I need hands, even inexperienced ones." He started walking toward the largest barn, expecting her to follow. "But understand this, Eliza Hart. I don't tolerate laziness, I don't tolerate excuses, and I sure as hell don't tolerate dishonesty. You work hard, you do what I tell you, and you might make it through 6 months. You slack off, you disobey, you cause me more trouble than you're worth, and contract or no contract, you're gone. Clear?" "Yes, sir." Eliza hurried after him, her worn boots slipping on the half-frozen ground. The ranch was bigger than it had looked from the wagon, but it had the unmistakable air of a place struggling to survive. Fences needed mending. Paint was peeling from the main house. The barn, while sturdy, showed signs of deferred maintenance. Everywhere Eliza looked, she saw work that needed doing and not enough hands to do it. Ryder led her into the barn, and Eliza's senses were immediately overwhelmed. The smell of hay, manure, leather, and horses filled her nose. The dim interior was a maze of stalls, feed bins, and equipment she couldn't begin to identify. And the sounds, the shifting of hooves, the rustle of straw, the occasional snort or whinny, all of it was completely foreign to her. 12 horses, Ryder said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. 4 are mine, the rest are boarding. They need to be fed twice a day, watered constantly, stalls cleaned daily. You'll also help with grooming, tack maintenance, and whatever else needs doing. Eliza nodded, trying to commit it all to memory while simultaneously fighting the urge to panic. She had no idea what half those words meant. Ryder stopped at a stall and gestured to the horse inside, a gentle-looking mare with kind eyes. This is Daisy. She's old, patient, doesn't spook easy. You'll start with her. Watch me. For the next hour, Ryder demonstrated the basics of horse care with the patience of a man teaching a child. He showed her how to approach the horse, how to halter her, how to clean her stall without startling her. He explained the different types of feed, the importance of fresh water, the signs of colic or injury. Eliza absorbed every word, her mind racing to keep up. But theory and practice were vastly different things. When Ryder handed her the halter and told her to try, Eliza's hand shook so badly she could barely hold it. Daisy, sensing her fear, shifted nervously. Easy, Ryder said, and Eliza wasn't sure if he was talking to her or the horse. Breathe. She can feel your fear. Eliza took a deep breath, forcing her hands to steady. She approached Daisy slowly, remembering Ryder's instructions. The mare's dark eyes watched her, cautious but not hostile. When Eliza finally managed to slip the halter over Daisy's head and buckle it, she felt a ridiculous surge of triumph. Ryder nodded, the closest thing to approval she'd seen from him. Not terrible. You'll do it 100 more times before you're good at it, but it's a start. They moved through the barn, Ryder introducing her to each horse. There was Copper, a nervous gelding who shied at shadows. Buck, an aging quarter horse with a calm temperament. Molly, a spirited paint who tried to nip Eliza's shoulder. Each animal had a personality, quirks, needs. Eliza tried to remember them all, feeling increasingly overwhelmed. Then they reached the last stall, set apart from the others at the far end of the barn. Ryder's entire demeanor changed as they approached. His shoulders tensed, his jaw set, and his hand moved unconsciously to rest on the door, as if bracing himself. This is Devil's Pen, Ryder said, his voice low and hard. You don't go near him. You don't feed him. You don't talk to him. You don't even look at him if you can help it. Understand? Eliza peered into the stall and immediately understood why. The horse inside was massive, a black stallion that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. His coat was dark as midnight, his eyes wild and rolling. As they approached, he pinned his ears back and lunged at the stall door with a scream that made Eliza jump backward. The door shuddered under the impact, but held. The stallion backed up, snorting, his entire body radiating rage and hatred. He's been like this for 3 years, Ryder said quietly, still staring at the horse. Won't let anyone near him, won't be ridden, won't be led. I keep him fed and watered, but that's it. He's dangerous, Eliza. He's already... Ryder's voice trailed off, and something dark passed over his face. Just stay away from him. That's not a suggestion. That's a rule. Break it, and you're done here. Eliza nodded, unable to look away from the stallion. Despite his fury, despite the clear danger, there was something magnificent about him. Something broken, but not defeated. Come on, Ryder said, turning away. I'll show you where you'll sleep. The bunkhouse was small, but clean. A single room with a wood stove, a narrow bed, a trunk for belongings, and a washstand. It was sparse, but it was more than Eliza had expected. At the charity house, she'd shared a dormitory with 15 other girls, sleeping on a thin mattress that smelled of mildew. You'll eat in the main house, Ryder said from the doorway. Breakfast at dawn, supper after evening chores. You miss a meal, you go hungry. Understood? Yes, sir. Ryder lingered for a moment as if he wanted to say something more. Finally, he spoke, his voice gruff. I don't know what your situation was before, and I don't much care. But you're here now, and I expect you to earn your keep. This isn't easy work, and it's not going to get easier. If you're smart, you'll pay attention, learn fast, and keep your head down. If you're not, he shrugged. Well, winter out here can kill you as easily as a horse can. Remember that. Then he was gone, his boots echoing on the wooden porch, leaving Eliza alone in the gathering darkness. She sat on the edge of the bed, her body aching from the journey, her mind reeling from everything that had happened. This morning, she'd been in Westridge, surrounded by familiar faces and familiar cruelty. Now she was here, in the middle of nowhere, responsible for animals she didn't understand, working for a man who clearly didn't want her. Eliza pulled her thin coat tighter and allowed herself, for just a moment, to feel the full weight of her situation. She was alone. She was unprepared. She was terrified. But she was also free of Mrs. Brennan, free of the charity house, free of the girls who'd mocked her every day. This place might be harsh, but at least it was different. At least it was a chance. Eliza lay down on the bed, still fully clothed, and stared at the ceiling. Outside, the wind howled across the plains, and somewhere in the distance, a horse screamed. The black stallion, she thought. Devil. Despite her exhaustion, sleep didn't come easily. Every sound was unfamiliar, every shadow suspicious. But eventually, her body's need overcame her mind's resistance, and she drifted into an uneasy sleep filled with dreams of wild horses and cold, gray eyes that saw through all her lies. Dawn came too early, announced by a sharp knock on the bunkhouse door. Up! Ryder's voice cut through the morning stillness. Chores don't wait for daylight. Eliza bolted upright, disoriented and stiff. The room was freezing, the wood stove had gone out during the night, and frost had formed on the inside of the window. She could see her breath in the air. 5 minutes, Ryder called again, his footsteps already moving away. Eliza scrambled out of bed, her fingers clumsy with cold as she tried to smooth her rumpled clothes and tie back her hair. She splashed icy water on her face from the washstand, gasping at the shock of it, then hurried outside. The ranch was just beginning to emerge from darkness, the sky turning from black to deep blue. Ryder was already at the barn, moving with the efficiency of long practice. He'd lit lanterns that cast warm pools of light in the dim interior. You're late, he said without looking at her. Horses don't care if you're tired. I'm sorry, Don't apologize. Just move faster tomorrow. He thrust a pitchfork at her. Start with Daisy's stall. Clean bedding gets tossed in the pile outside, fresh straw goes down. I want it clean enough you'd sleep in it yourself. Eliza took the pitchfork, her hands already blistering where she'd gripped it wrong. She made her way to Daisy's stall, trying to remember everything Ryder had shown her yesterday. The mare watched her with patient eyes as Eliza fumbled with the halter, leading her out to a small paddock. Cleaning the stall was back-breaking work. The soiled straw was heavier than it looked, the pitchfork awkward in her inexperienced hands. Within minutes, Eliza was sweating despite the cold, her shoulders burning, her back screaming in protest. She could hear Ryder working in the other stalls, moving at twice her speed, and the sound of his efficiency only highlighted her own inadequacy. It took her nearly an hour to clean Daisy's stall and lay down fresh bedding. By the time she was done, Ryder had finished 4. Faster, was all he said when he passed her. You've got 11 more to do. The morning blurred into a haze of physical labor unlike anything Eliza had experienced. Cleaning stalls, hauling water buckets that sloshed and spilled, dragging heavy feed bags that left her arms trembling. Every task revealed new ignorance. She didn't know how much to feed each horse, couldn't remember which ones needed supplements, struggled to work the water pump until Ryder showed her the trick of it. She made mistakes. Lots of them. She forgot to latch Copper's stall properly, and the gelding wandered into the aisle, nearly causing a disaster. She overfilled a water trough and created a muddy mess. She dropped a feed bucket, spilling grain across the barn floor. Each mistake earned her a sharp look from Ryder, but to her surprise, he didn't yell. He simply corrected her, showed her the right way, and expected her to remember for next time. It was almost worse than yelling. His disappointment was quiet, patient, inevitable. By the time breakfast came, Eliza was ready to collapse. Her hands were blistered and bleeding in places. Her back felt like it might snap. Her legs trembled with every step. Ryder's house was as spare as the bunkhouse, functional and clean, but devoid of any personal touch. The kitchen was dominated by a large wood stove, and the smell of coffee filled the air. Ryder gestured to the table where he'd set out bread, cheese, and cold meat. "Eat," he said simply, pouring himself coffee from a battered pot. "You've got 15 minutes before we start on grooming." Eliza sat gingerly, every muscle protesting. She reached for the bread with shaking hands, trying to eat despite having no appetite. The food was simple but good, infinitely better than the watery porridge and stale bread that had been standard at the charity house. Ryder sat across from her, drinking his coffee in silence. He watched her with those unreadable gray eyes, and Eliza wondered what he saw. Did he see her failures? Her weakness? Was he already planning how to break the contract? "You're soft," Ryder finally said, his voice matter-of-fact rather than cruel. "City's soft. This work's going to break you if you don't toughen up fast." Eliza swallowed hard, forcing down a piece of bread. "I'm trying." "Trying's not enough out here." Ryder set down his cup. "You need to do more than try. You need to succeed. Every day, no matter how tired you are, no matter how much it hurts. Because if you fail, it's not just you that suffers, it's the horses. They depend on us. Can't take a day off because your hands hurt or your back's sore." "I understand." "Do you?" Ryder leaned forward slightly. "Because I don't think you do, Eliza Hart. I don't think you understand what you've signed up for. This isn't some temporary inconvenience until something better comes along. This is survival. 6 months of winter on the frontier, working dawn to dark, with no backup if you fail. You ready for that?" Eliza met his eyes, and for the first time since arriving, she felt a spark of something other than fear. Anger, maybe, or stubbornness. "What choice do I have?" Something flickered in Ryder's expression, surprise maybe, or recognition. "None. Just like me." He stood, draining the last of his coffee. 15 minutes. Meet me at the barn." The rest of that first day passed in a similar blur. Ryder taught her how to groom, how to pick hooves, how to inspect for injuries. Each task required a gentleness Eliza didn't know she possessed, combined with a firmness that felt foreign to her nature. The horses responded differently to her uncertainty, some with patience, others with irritation. Molly, the paint mare, tried to bite her twice. Buck simply stood still and endured her clumsy efforts. Copper shied away from her trembling hands. "They know you're afraid," Ryder told her, not unkindly, "and they don't respect fear. You don't have to be brave, but you have to act like you are. Fake it until it's real." Fake it until it's real. Eliza repeated the phrase like a mantra as she worked, forcing her hands to steady, her voice to firm, her movements to project a confidence she didn't feel. By evening chores, Eliza moved like a ghost through the barn. Her body had moved past pain into a kind of numb exhaustion. Her hands left bloody smears on everything she touched. Her legs barely supported her weight, but she finished. Every stall cleaned, every horse fed and watered, every task completed. It took her twice as long as it should have, and Ryder had to redo half her work, but she finished. Supper was a quiet affair. More bread, some stew that Ryder had made earlier in the week, and blessed coffee that Eliza gulped down despite its bitterness. Ryder still didn't talk much, but his silence felt less hostile now. More like the comfortable quiet of two people too tired for conversation. "Same time tomorrow," Ryder said as Eliza rose to leave. "And the day after that? And every day for the next 6 months. Think you can handle it?" Eliza paused at the door, looking back at him. The lamplight cast shadows across his face, highlighting the weariness in his features. He looked older than she'd first thought. Not old, but weathered, worn down by years of hard work and harder losses. "I'll handle it," Eliza said, surprised by the certainty in her own voice. Ryder nodded slowly. "We'll see." Eliza stumbled back to the bunkhouse, managed to light the wood stove with shaking hands, and collapsed onto the bed. She should wash, should change clothes, should tend to her blistered hands. But her body refused to cooperate. Within seconds, she was asleep. The next morning was identical to the first, and the one after that, and the one after that. Days blurred into a brutal routine: wake before dawn, morning chores, breakfast, training, midday chores, dinner, evening chores, supper, sleep, repeat. Eliza's body screamed in protest for the first week. Every morning she woke up more exhausted than when she'd gone to bed, her muscles so stiff she could barely move. Her hands developed calluses on top of blisters on top of raw skin. Her back ached with a deep, persistent pain that never quite left. But gradually, imperceptibly, something began to change. The calluses hardened, the blisters healed, the muscles that had trembled with every task began to strengthen. By the second week, Eliza could lift a feed bag without straining. By the third week, she could clean a stall in half the time it had initially taken. By the fourth week, she could work alongside Ryder for entire mornings without needing to stop and rest. Her body was transforming, adapting to the brutal demands of ranch life. She was losing the softness that had always defined her, the excess weight that the charity house girls had mocked. In its place came lean muscle, earned through endless hours of hard labor. Her shoulders broadened, her arms developed definition. Her stance became steadier, more grounded. And with the physical changes came something else, a shift in how she saw herself. At the charity house, Eliza had always been the weak one, the slow one, the girl who couldn't keep up. But here, there was only the work, and either you did it or you didn't. There was no room for self-pity, no audience for her failures except the horses, who didn't judge her past, only her present actions. Ryder noticed. She could tell by the way he stopped hovering quite so much, stopped checking her work quite so often. He still didn't praise her. That wasn't his nature, but his criticisms became less frequent, his corrections more subtle. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was something close to acceptance. But even as Eliza grew stronger, even as she began to understand the rhythms of the ranch, one mystery remained unsolved. Devil. The black stallion occupied her thoughts far more than was wise. Every day as she worked her way through the other horses, she would pause near his stall, stealing glances at the massive, furious animal within. And every day, Ryder's words echoed in her mind. Stay away from him. She obeyed, of course. She wasn't suicidal, but her curiosity grew with each passing day. Devil was fed differently than the other horses. Ryder handled it himself, never allowing Eliza near the stall. He would approach with a bucket of grain, open a small slot at the bottom of the door, and slide the food through before the stallion could attack. Water was managed the same way. It was a system born of necessity and danger. But sometimes, in the quiet moments between chores, Eliza would linger near Devil's pen, not close enough to be in danger, but close enough to observe. And what she observed fascinated her. When the barn was full of activity, Devil was a terror, screaming, kicking, lunging at anyone who passed. But in the quiet moments, when he thought no one was watching, the stallion would stand perfectly still, his head low, his eyes distant. In those moments, he didn't look savage. He looked heartbroken. One afternoon, nearly 6 weeks into her time at the ranch, Eliza found herself alone in the barn. Ryder had ridden out to check on fence repairs in the far pasture, leaving her to finish the grooming. She'd completed her assigned tasks and found herself, almost unconsciously, drifting toward Devil's stall. The stallion watched her approach, his ears flat against his skull, his nostrils flaring, but he didn't charge the door. He simply stood there, radiating menace and warning. "Easy, boy," Eliza whispered, stopping a safe distance away. "I'm not going to hurt you." Devil snorted, tossing his head, but still didn't move. "I know you're angry," Eliza continued, her voice low and soothing. "I don't know why, but I know what angry feels like. What it's like when the whole world seems set against you." The stallion's ears flickered forward, just slightly, and Eliza felt a thrill of connection. He was listening. Maybe he didn't understand the words, but he heard something in her tone, something that spoke to whatever pain he carried. "We're not so different, you and I," Eliza said softly. "Nobody wanted us. Nobody thought we'd amount to anything. But we're still here, aren't we? Still fighting." For just a moment, Devil's entire posture seemed to soften. His head lowered slightly, his eyes losing some of their wild fury. It lasted only seconds before the walls came back up, before he pinned his ears and turned away with a warning squeal. But Eliza had seen it, that brief glimpse of the horse beneath the rage. She heard the barn door open and quickly moved away from Devil's stall, returning to her work. Ryder entered moments later, his hat dusted with snow, the first of the season. "Chores done?" he asked, not quite looking at her. "Yes, sir, just finishing up." Ryder nodded, moving past her to check her work. He was thorough as always, inspecting each stall, each water trough, each feed bin. When he'd completed his circuit, he paused, studying her with that intense gaze that made her feel transparent. "You're getting better," he said finally. "Stronger." It was the closest thing to a compliment Eliza had ever received from him, and she felt a warmth spread through her chest. "Thank you, sir." "Don't thank me. You did the work." Ryder hesitated, then added, "Most people quit by now. The last 3 hands I hired didn't make it 2 weeks." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Ryder cleared his throat, uncomfortable with the moment of openness. "Storm's coming. Big one by the look of the sky. We'll need to bring in extra feed, make sure the barn's secure. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." "I'll be ready." As Ryder walked away, Eliza glanced back at Devil's stall one more time. The stallion stood in shadow, watching her with eyes that held secrets she desperately wanted to understand. Tomorrow would be a long day, Ryder had said, but Eliza was beginning to realize that every day here was long. Every day was a test. The question wasn't whether she could survive one hard day, but whether she could survive an endless string of them. As she stepped out of the barn into the gathering twilight, the first snowflakes began to fall. Winter was coming to the frontier, and with it, Eliza Hart's real trial was about to begin. The storm hit 3 days later with a ferocity that transformed the ranch into a frozen battleground. Snow fell in thick, relentless sheets, driven sideways by winds that howled like wounded animals. The temperature plummeted so fast that water left in buckets froze solid within hours. Eliza had never experienced winter like this. The charity house in Westridge had been cold, certainly, but nothing like the savage, bone-deep freeze of the open frontier. Ryder had prepared them as best he could. The day before the storm arrived, they'd worked from before dawn until well past dark, hauling extra hay into the barn, securing loose boards, checking every latch and hinge. Eliza's muscles, which had finally begun to adjust to the daily routine, screamed in fresh protest as they lifted, carried, hammered, and reinforced. But she didn't complain. She'd learned that Ryder had no patience for complaints, only for results. When the storm finally broke over them, Eliza understood why he'd pushed so hard. The wind tore at the barn doors with enough force to rip them from their hinges if they hadn't been properly secured. Snow found every crack and crevice, creating small drifts even inside the protected spaces. The cold was so intense that breathing hurt, each inhalation burning like fire in her lungs. "Stay close to the rope lines," Ryder shouted over the wind as they made their way from the house to the barn for morning chores. He'd strung ropes between the buildings the night before, a lifeline to prevent anyone from getting lost in the whiteout conditions. "You let go, you die. Understand?" Eliza nodded, her face already numb despite the scarf wrapped around it. She gripped the rope with both hands, following Ryder's dark shape through the blinding snow. The 50 yards between house and barn felt like miles. Inside the barn, the horses were restless, made anxious by the storm's fury. They shifted in their stalls, ears swiveling at every crash and groan of the wind-battered structure. Even patient Daisy seemed on edge, her eyes rolling white as Eliza approached. "Talk to them," Ryder instructed, his voice rough from shouting over the wind. "They need to know we're here, that they're safe." Eliza moved through the barn, speaking softly to each horse as she worked. Her hands were clumsy with cold despite her gloves, making even simple tasks difficult. Feed buckets slipped from her grip. Stall latches stuck. Water sloshed and froze on the barn floor, creating treacherous patches of ice. But she kept working, kept moving. Because stopping meant thinking about the cold, and thinking about the cold meant acknowledging how desperately uncomfortable she was, and that was a luxury she couldn't afford. The storm lasted 3 days. 3 days of brutal, relentless work in conditions that tested every ounce of strength and determination Eliza had developed. They checked the horses every 4 hours, around the clock, to ensure none had developed frostbite or injury. Sleep came in brief, fitful stretches between trips to the barn. Food was whatever could be eaten quickly and didn't require much preparation. Bread, cheese, dried meat, endless cups of bitter coffee that Eliza had learned to drink without grimacing. Ryder barely spoke during those 3 days. He moved with grim efficiency, his face set in hard lines, his attention focused entirely on keeping the animals alive. Eliza followed his lead, matching his silence, his determination. There was something almost meditative about it. The singular focus on survival, on the next task, the next hour, the next check of the barn. On the second night of the storm, as they huddled in the barn between rounds, waiting for the next check time, Ryder finally broke the silence. "You're tougher than I thought," he said, not looking at her. He was repairing a broken bridle by lantern light, his scarred hands working with practiced precision. Eliza, who'd been half dozing against a hay bale, startled at his voice. "Sir? When you first arrived, I gave you 2 weeks, maybe 3 if you were stubborn." Ryder pulled a stitch tight, testing the leather. "It's been almost 2 months. And you're still here. I don't have anywhere else to go," Eliza said quietly. Neither did the others. They still left. Ryder set down the bridle and finally looked at her. "Takes more than desperation to survive out here. Takes something else. Don't know what to call it exactly. Grit, maybe, or just pure stubbornness." Eliza didn't know how to respond to that. At the charity house, stubbornness had been listed among her many faults, right up there with laziness and incompetence. Hearing it spoken of as a virtue was strange. "My brother had it," Ryder continued, his voice going distant. "That stubbornness, that refusal to quit no matter what." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at something Eliza couldn't see. "Got him killed in the end." The temperature in the barn seemed to drop another 10 degrees. Eliza knew she was standing on the edge of something important, some truth that Ryder rarely shared. She hardly dared breathe, afraid any sound might break the moment. "He was the one who bought Devil," Ryder said finally. "Found him at an auction, already half wild. Previous owner had beaten him, starved him, tried to break his spirit with cruelty. My brother thought he could save him, thought patience and kindness could undo all that damage." Ryder's jaw clenched, and Eliza saw the shadow of old pain cross his features. He was wrong. Or maybe he just didn't have enough time. 3 years ago, he went into Devil's pen. Stallion was spooked by something. Thunder, maybe, or a snake. Don't know for sure. But he reared up, came down on my brother, crushed his skull. Eliza's hand flew to her mouth, horror washing over her. "Mr. Callahan, I found him 20 minutes later." Ryder continued as if she hadn't spoken. Devil was standing over him, already calm again, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just killed the one person who'd tried to help him. Ryder's voice was flat, emotionless, but Eliza could hear the barely controlled rage beneath it. "I should have put him down that day. Every practical bone in my body said to do it, but I couldn't, because that horse was the last thing my brother cared about, and killing him felt like erasing the last piece of James from this place." The silence that followed was heavy with grief and guilt. Eliza understood now why Ryder had forbidden her from going near Devil's pen, why he approached the stallion with such rigid caution, why the mere sight of the horse brought that darkness to his eyes. "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered. "I didn't know." "No reason you should have." Ryder stood abruptly, the moment of vulnerability closing like a door slamming shut. "But now you do. So you understand why I meant it when I said stay away from that horse. He's not some project to fix. He's a killer, plain and simple, and I won't lose anyone else to him." The way he said it, anyone else, made Eliza's throat tighten. It was the closest Ryder had come to admitting he cared whether she lived or died. "Yes, sir," she said. "I understand." Ryder nodded, checking his pocket watch. "Time for another round. Let's go." They returned to their routine, but something had shifted between them. Ryder's revelation had cracked open a door Eliza hadn't known existed, offering a glimpse of the man behind the hard exterior. He wasn't just a stern taskmaster or a reluctant employer. He was someone who'd lost deeply, who carried his grief like a stone in his chest, who kept going because stopping meant acknowledging the magnitude of what he'd lost. Eliza understood that kind of pain. Different in its details, but the same in its essence. She'd learned early that the world didn't care about your suffering, didn't pause to let you heal. You either kept moving, or you got left behind. When the storm finally broke on the 4th morning, the world emerged transformed. Snow lay in massive drifts, some as high as the barn roof. The sun reflected off the white expanse with blinding intensity. Everything was clean, pristine, and utterly unforgiving. "We'll need to dig out," Ryder said, surveying the damage. "Paths to the barn, to the well, to the woodpile. Then we need to check the fences. Drifts that high can bring them down. Eliza grabbed a shovel without being asked. The work was brutal, lifting heavy snow, clearing paths, only to have the wind fill them in again. Her back, which had finally stopped aching constantly, resumed its protest. But she worked alongside Ryder, matching his pace as best she could. It took them 2 full days to dig out from the storm. 2 days of endless shoveling, of checking on panicked horses, of ensuring pipes hadn't frozen and burst. By the end of it, Eliza felt like she'd aged 10 years. But she'd also grown stronger. Not just physically, though her body had continued to transform. Leaner, harder, more resilient. She'd grown stronger in ways that were harder to quantify. She faced each day with less fear, each task with more confidence. The work that had once seemed impossible now felt merely difficult. It was progress, small but undeniable. Ryder noticed. She could tell by the way he started giving her more complex tasks, trusting her with responsibilities that required judgment, not just muscle. He taught her to recognize early signs of colic, how to wrap a strained leg, how to read a horse's body language to prevent problems before they started. "You've got good instincts," he said one afternoon as they worked together to treat a small cut on Buck's foreleg. "Better than some who've been doing this for years." The praise, coming from Ryder, felt more valuable than any compliment Eliza had received in her life. At the charity house, kind words had been weapons, used to manipulate, to create false hope, to make the inevitable cruelty hurt more. But Ryder didn't do false kindness. If he said something, he meant it. As winter deepened and the days grew shorter, Eliza settled into the rhythm of ranch life. Wake before dawn, morning chores, breakfast with Ryder, during which he might offer a few words or might sit in complete silence, training and maintenance work, midday feeding, afternoon chores, supper, evening check, sleep, repeat. It was a hard life, harder than anything she'd known, but it was also honest. There were no hidden agendas, no social hierarchies to navigate, no mean girls whispering behind her back, just the work, the weather, and the animals who cared nothing for her past. But one element of ranch life continued to haunt her thoughts, pulling at her attention even when she knew it was dangerous to give in. Devil. Despite Ryder's warnings, despite knowing what the stallion had done, Eliza found herself drawn to the black horse. Not in any desire to approach him or work with him, she wasn't that foolish. But she couldn't help watching him, studying him, trying to understand the rage that consumed him. She noticed patterns. Devil was most violent during feeding times when Ryder approached with food. He was calmer in the early morning before the barn became active. And sometimes late at night when Eliza made the evening check alone, she would hear him, not the screams of fury, but something else, a sound that was almost mournful. One evening, after Ryder had already retired to the house, Eliza lingered in the barn. She'd finished all her assigned tasks, but something pulled her to stay. The other horses were settling for the night, their breathing slow and steady. The barn was quiet except for the occasional shift of hooves in straw. She found herself standing near Devil's stall again, far enough back to be safe, close enough to see him clearly. The stallion stood in shadow, his black coat absorbing what little light the lantern provided. His head was low, his eyes distant. He looked less like a killer and more like something deeply, profoundly broken. "What happened to you?" Eliza whispered, her voice barely audible. "What did they do to make you this way?" Devil's ear swiveled toward her voice, acknowledging her presence but not reacting with his usual fury. Maybe he was tired, maybe the darkness made him less defensive. Or maybe, Eliza thought, he recognized something in her voice. The same loneliness, the same pain of being unwanted and misunderstood. "I know what it's like," she continued, speaking as much to herself as to the horse. "To be judged for things you can't control. To have everyone expect you to fail. To carry so much anger you don't know what to do with it." The stallion shifted, moving closer to the stall door. Not aggressive, just listening. Eliza's heart hammered in her chest, but she didn't move away. "They sent me here hoping I'd fail," she said softly. "Mrs. Brennan, the girls at the charity house, probably even Mr. Callahan at first. Everyone expected me to quit, to prove I was as useless as they always said. But I'm still here, still fighting, just like you." Devil's nostrils flared, and for a moment, Eliza could have sworn she saw recognition in his dark eyes. Not understanding of her words, perhaps, but of the emotion behind them. Pain recognized pain. The barn door creaked open, and Eliza jumped, her heart racing. Ryder stood silhouetted in the doorway, a lantern in his hand. "What are you doing?" His voice was tight, controlled, but Eliza heard the edge of anger underneath. "I finished evening check," she said quickly, stepping away from Devil's stall. "I was just standing by the pen I explicitly told you to stay away from." Ryder crossed the distance between them in quick strides. "You think rules don't apply to you? Think you're special somehow?" "No, sir, That horse killed my brother," Ryder said, his voice low and dangerous. "I told you that. And here you are, standing close enough for him to reach through and crack your skull if he wanted to. What part of stay away is unclear to you?" Eliza had never seen Ryder truly angry before. Frustrated, yes. Disappointed, certainly. But this was different. This was fear dressed up as fury, and it was directed entirely at her. "I wasn't close enough to be in danger," Eliza said, trying to keep her voice steady. You were just disobeying a direct order." Ryder set his lantern down with a sharp thud. "Let me make this absolutely clear, Eliza. I don't care how strong you've gotten. I don't care how well you've learned to handle the other horses. That stallion is off limits. Period. One more time near his pen, and we're done. Contract or no contract, you're gone. Understood?" The finality in his voice hit Eliza like a physical blow. For weeks she'd been building something here. Not just skills, but a place, a purpose, maybe even the beginnings of belonging. And now, because of her stupid curiosity, it was all on the verge of collapse. "Understood," she said quietly, her eyes burning with unshed tears. Ryder stared at her for a long moment, his chest heaving, his jaw set. Then, abruptly, he turned away. "Get to bed. Morning comes early." Eliza fled the barn, her vision blurred, her throat tight. She made it to the bunkhouse before the tears fell. She'd been so careful, so determined not to give Ryder any reason to send her away. And in one moment of foolish curiosity, she'd nearly destroyed everything. She lay awake most of the night, staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation in her mind. By morning, she'd resolved to avoid Devil's Pen entirely, to prove to Ryder that she could follow orders, that she valued her place here more than her curiosity. But fate, as it often does, had different plans. The next day dawned clear and bitterly cold. Eliza moved through morning chores in silence, avoiding Ryder's gaze, focusing entirely on her work. He didn't speak to her beyond the necessary instructions, and the silence between them felt heavy with disappointment. She was in Copper's stall, mucking out the soiled bedding, when she heard it, a crash from the far end of the barn, followed by a sound that made her blood run cold. Not Devil's usual scream of rage, but something different. Pain. Eliza dropped her pitchfork and ran toward the sound. She knew she shouldn't, knew getting anywhere near Devil's Pen would confirm every doubt Ryder had about her judgment, but the sound of the horse's distress overrode all rational thought. She reached the stall and understood immediately what had happened. A support beam, weakened by rot and the weight of snow on the roof, had partially collapsed. It hadn't come down entirely, but it had fallen across the stall at an angle, pinning Devil against the far wall. The stallion was trapped, unable to move forward or back, the heavy beam pressing against his shoulder and neck. He thrashed wildly, eyes rolling white with panic, making his situation worse with every movement. "Easy," Eliza breathed, her mind racing. "Easy, boy. I've got you." She had seconds to make a decision. Wait for Ryder and let Devil potentially injure himself further in his panic? Or try to help, risking both their lives but possibly preventing serious harm? The stallion screamed again, a sound of pure terror, and Eliza's decision was made. She grabbed a rope from the nearby hook and approached the stall door. Her hands shook as she worked the latch, but her voice remained steady. "I'm coming in. Don't kill me. Please don't kill me." The door swung open, and Eliza stepped into Devil's Pen for the first time. The stallion's head whipped toward her, ears flat, teeth bared. But he couldn't charge, couldn't attack. The beam held him fast. Eliza could see blood on his shoulder where the wood had scraped away skin, could see the terror in his eyes, warring with his instinct to fight. "I know you're scared," Eliza said, moving slowly, carefully, toward the collapsed beam. "I know you don't trust me. But that beam's going to hurt you worse if you keep fighting it. Let me help. Devil snorted, tossing his head as much as the confined space allowed. But he didn't try to bite when Eliza came within range. Maybe he was too panicked, maybe he was too exhausted, or maybe some small part of him recognized that she was trying to help. Eliza assessed the situation with the pragmatism Ryder had drilled into her over the past months. The beam was heavy, but if she could lift one end just enough, Devil might be able to pull free. The risk was that he'd bolt the second he was loose, possibly trampling her in his panic. "You're going to run," Eliza said, looping the rope around the end of the beam. "That's fine. Natural. Just please don't kill me on your way out." She braced herself, planting her feet the way she'd learned to do when hauling heavy feed sacks. Then she pulled. The beam shifted. Not much, but enough. Devil felt the pressure ease and surged forward, trying to escape. The movement nearly yanked the rope from Eliza's hands, but she held on, using the stallion's own momentum to help lift the beam higher. "Come on," she grunted, her muscles screaming. "Come on, move!" Devil lunged again, and this time he pulled free. The beam crashed back down, missing Eliza by inches as she dove to the side. The stallion wheeled around, wild-eyed and confused, suddenly aware that he was loose and his tormentor, or savior, he hadn't decided which, was on the ground at his mercy. Eliza scrambled backward, pressing herself against the stall wall, making herself as small as possible. Devil advanced a step, nostrils flared, every muscle tensed. She could see the decision forming in his eyes, fight or flight, kill or run. "I helped you," Eliza whispered, her voice shaking. "I know you don't understand, but I helped you. Please remember that." For a long, terrifying moment, Devil stood over her, his massive head lowered, his hot breath on her face. Then, something in his expression shifted. The fury drained away, replaced by confusion, then something that might have been recognition. The stallion backed up 2 steps, then turned and walked out of the stall into the barn aisle, moving with the cautious uncertainty of an animal who'd just been freed from a trap. Eliza slumped against the wall, her entire body shaking with adrenaline and relief. She'd done it. She'd gone into Devil's pen and lived. More than that, she'd helped him, and he'd chosen not to kill her for it. "What the hell did you just do?" Ryder's voice cut through Eliza's relief like a knife. She looked up to find him standing in the barn entrance, his face pale with shock and anger. Behind him, she could see Devil standing in the middle of the aisle, head high, eyes watchful, but not aggressive. Eliza struggled to her feet, her legs unsteady. The beam collapsed. He was trapped. You had to do nothing except come get me," Ryder interrupted, advancing on her with quick, angry strides. "Instead, you went into that pen alone. After everything I said, after I told you one more time and you were done." "He was hurt," Eliza said, finding her spine despite her fear. "He was panicking, hurting himself worse. What was I supposed to do, just let him suffer?" "You were supposed to obey orders," Ryder's voice echoed through the barn, spooking several of the other horses. "You were supposed to have the sense not to walk into a pen with a killer." "He didn't kill me," Eliza shot back, her own anger rising now. "He could have. I was helpless, and he chose not to. Doesn't that tell you something?" "It tells me you got lucky," Ryder said coldly. "Nothing more." They stood facing each other, both breathing hard, the tension between them thick enough to cut. In the background, Devil watched them, his head cocked slightly as if trying to understand the conflict. "Pack your things," Ryder said finally, his voice flat. "I'll take you to town tomorrow." The words hit Eliza like a punch to the gut. "Mr. Callahan, please. This isn't a debate. You disobeyed a direct order. You put yourself in danger. I won't be responsible for you getting killed because you can't follow simple instructions." He turned away, unable or unwilling to look at her. "I'll pay you for the time you worked, same as if you'd finished the contract. But you're done here." Eliza watched him walk away, her world crumbling around her. 3 months of backbreaking work, of proving herself, of finally finding a place where she fit, all of it destroyed in a moment of decision she'd make again without hesitation. But she didn't cry. Not this time. Because if there was one thing Eliza had learned on the frontier, it was that tears changed nothing. The world didn't care about your pain. It only cared what you did next. Eliza didn't pack that night. She couldn't bring herself to accept that it was over, that tomorrow she'd be loaded into a wagon and sent back to a town that had never wanted her. Instead, she sat on the edge of her narrow bed in the bunkhouse, staring at her hands. They were different now than they'd been 3 months ago. Calloused, strong, scarred from countless small injuries. Working hands, capable hands. She thought about Devil standing over her, that moment when he could have ended her life with a single strike. She'd seen the decision in his eyes, the choice between violence and mercy. And he'd chosen mercy. Ryder could call it luck all he wanted, but Eliza knew better. The stallion had recognized something in her, just as she'd recognized something in him. Sleep came fitfully, filled with dreams of black horses and collapsed beams, of Ryder's disappointed face and Mrs. Brennan's cruel smile. When dawn broke, gray and cold, Eliza rose mechanically and dressed. If this was her last day on the ranch, she'd at least finish it with dignity. She made her way to the barn through the frozen morning air, expecting to find Ryder already there, ready to send her packing. Instead, she found the barn empty except for the horses. No sign of Ryder, no sound from the house, just the quiet routine of animals waiting for their morning feed. Eliza hesitated, then made a decision. If she was leaving today, she'd at least complete one final round of chores. It was the least she could do for the horses who'd taught her so much about strength and patience. She started with Daisy, the gentle mare who'd been her first real student. The horse nickered softly as Eliza entered her stall, recognizing her immediately. Eliza found comfort in the routine. The familiar smell of hay and horse, the rhythmic sound of grain pouring into buckets, the soft, huffing breaths of animals content in their care. She worked her way through the barn, speaking quietly to each horse, saying goodbye in her own way. Buck, who taught her to be firm. Molly, who taught her to be quick. Copper, who taught her patience. Each one had been part of her education. Each one had helped transform her from the frightened girl who'd arrived 3 months ago into someone stronger. When she reached the end of the barn, she found Devil standing in the aisle where he'd been the night before. Someone, Ryder presumably, had left his stall door open, giving him the freedom to move. The stallion stood near his pen but didn't enter it, as if the memory of being trapped was too fresh. Eliza stopped a safe distance away, studying him in the morning light. The scrape on his shoulder from the beam looked superficial, already beginning to scab over. He seemed calm, watching her with dark, intelligent eyes that held none of yesterday's panic. "I'm leaving today," Eliza said softly. "Ryder's sending me away. Says I can't follow orders, that I put myself in danger." She laughed bitterly. "He's not wrong, but I'd do it again. I couldn't just let you suffer." Devil's ears swiveled forward, focused entirely on her voice. He took a step closer, and Eliza's heart rate kicked up, but she didn't move. If the stallion wanted to punish her for yesterday's intrusion, she supposed she'd earned it. But Devil didn't attack. Instead, he lowered his massive head slightly, a gesture that in any other horse might have been submission or trust. In Devil, it was nothing short of miraculous. "I wish I could have helped you more," Eliza whispered, fighting the thickness in her throat. "I wish I understood what they did to you, what makes you so angry. Maybe if I'd had more time, you're still here." Eliza spun around to find Ryder standing in the barn entrance, his expression unreadable. He was bundled in his heavy coat, his hat pulled low against the cold, and he carried 2 mugs of coffee. The steam rose from them in the frigid air. "I was just finishing morning chores," Eliza said quickly, stepping away from Devil. "I didn't go in his pen, I swear. He came out on his own." Ryder studied her for a long moment, then walked forward and held out one of the mugs. "Coffee?" Eliza took it automatically, confused by the gesture. "I thought you said to pack, that you were taking me to town today." "I said that, yes." Ryder took a long drink from his own mug, his eyes on Devil rather than her. "Spent most of the night thinking about it, about what happened yesterday, about what I saw." Eliza waited, afraid to hope, afraid to speak and break whatever fragile moment this was. "That horse hasn't let anyone within 10 feet of him without attacking for 3 years, Ryder continued quietly. "Not me, not the vet I brought in once, not anyone. He's lived in rage and isolation since the day he killed my brother. And yesterday you walked into his pen, freed him from a trap, and he let you walk out alive. He could have been too panicked to... He wasn't, Ryder interrupted. I saw his face when I walked in. He was calm, clear-headed. He made a choice. He finally looked at Eliza, and she saw something in his expression she'd never seen before. Uncertainty. I've been around horses my whole life. My father was a horseman, his father before him, and I've never seen anything like what I saw yesterday. Eliza's hands tightened around the warm mug. So you're not sending me away? Ryder's jaw clenched. You disobeyed a direct order. You put yourself at risk. By all rights, I should put you on a wagon and never look back. But you also saved that horse from serious injury, maybe even saved his life. And you did it at considerable risk to yourself, without thinking about the consequences. Ryder set his mug down on a fence post. That kind of courage is rare, and maybe I've been letting my own fear make decisions that aren't fair. Fear? Eliza echoed, surprised. Ryder had never struck her as afraid of anything. Of losing someone else, Ryder admitted, his voice rough. Of watching another person die because I wasn't careful enough, wasn't protective enough. James was always the brave one, always the one willing to take risks. I was the cautious brother, the one who calculated every decision, and I couldn't save him. The raw pain in his voice made Eliza's chest ache. She understood survivors' guilt intimately, though her own came from different sources. The charity house had been full of children who disappeared, some adopted, some sent away, some who simply vanished. Eliza had always wondered why she'd survived when others hadn't, why she'd been cursed to keep going when giving up would have been so much easier. You're not responsible for what happened to your brother, Eliza said gently, just like you're not responsible for what I choose to do. But I am responsible for you while you're on my ranch, Ryder countered, and I won't watch another person get killed by that horse. Then help me work with him, Eliza said, the words spilling out before she could stop them. Teach me how to do it safely. You know horses better than anyone. If there's a way to reach him, to help him heal, you'd know how. Ryder's eyes widened. You want to train Devil? Are you insane? Maybe, Eliza admitted, but you saw what happened yesterday. He chose not to hurt me. That means something's still alive in there, underneath all that rage, something worth saving. He's a killer, Eliza. That doesn't change just because he had one moment of clarity. And I'm supposed to be worthless, Eliza shot back, her voice stronger now. Lazy, incompetent, too expensive to keep. But I'm still here, still working, still proving everyone wrong. Why can't he have that same chance? Ryder stared at her, and Eliza saw the moment her words hit home. He understood what she was really saying, that both she and Devil were survivors of cruelty, shaped by pain but not defined by it, that they both deserved a chance at redemption. If we do this, Ryder said slowly, we do it my way. Slow, controlled, safe. One wrong move and we stop immediately, and you follow every instruction I give without question. Can you do that? Eliza's heart soared. Yes, sir. Absolutely. Don't make me regret this, Ryder muttered, but there was something almost like warmth in his voice. He turned to look at Devil, who'd been watching their entire exchange with apparent interest. All right, you black demon, let's see if there's anything worth saving under all that anger. The next weeks became a careful dance of trust and patience. Ryder approached Devil's rehabilitation with the same methodical precision he brought to everything else, starting with the basics and refusing to rush. The first step was simply getting the stallion comfortable with their presence. Every morning and evening, Ryder and Eliza would sit near Devil's pen, not inside it, just near it, and talk quietly while going about their business. They'd repair tack, organize supplies, or simply drink coffee, making their presence routine and non-threatening. Devil watched them with suspicion at first, ears back, ready to explode at any sudden movement. But gradually, over days that stretched into weeks, he began to relax. Horses are prey animals, Ryder explained one afternoon as they sat on hay bales outside Devil's stall. Their instinct is to run from danger, to trust their fear. But they're also herd animals. They crave companionship, connection. Devil's been isolated for so long he's forgotten how to be part of something. Like me, Eliza said without thinking. Ryder glanced at her, his expression softening. Yeah, like you. The comparison wasn't lost on Eliza. She'd spent her childhood isolated by her peers' cruelty, learning to trust only herself, building walls to protect against inevitable rejection. Working with Devil was forcing her to confront those same walls, to understand that healing required vulnerability as much as strength. They progressed in tiny increments. First, Ryder demonstrated how to approach the stall without triggering Devil's defensive response. Slow movements, steady breathing, no direct eye contact. Then Eliza tried, her heart hammering every time, waiting for the stallion to charge or scream, but he didn't. He watched her with wary eyes, but he didn't attack. "Talk to him," Ryder instructed. "Let him learn your voice." So Eliza talked. She told Devil about her day, about the other horses, about memories from the charity house that she'd never shared with anyone. She told him about the girls who'd mocked her weight, about Mrs. Brennan's cruelty disguised as charity, about the desperate fear she'd felt arriving at the ranch. And somehow, speaking these truths to a horse who couldn't judge her felt like releasing poison from a wound. Devil listened. His ears would flick forward when she spoke, his head would lower slightly, and the wild fury in his eyes would dim to something closer to curiosity. It wasn't trust, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. One morning, 3 weeks after they'd started the rehabilitation work, Eliza arrived at the barn to find Devil standing at the front of his stall rather than hiding in the back. His head was over the door, ears pricked forward, as if he'd been waiting for her. "Good morning," Eliza said softly, approaching slowly. "You're in a good mood today." Devil snorted, tossing his head, but there was no aggression in the gesture. Just energy, maybe even anticipation. Eliza stopped a few feet from the door, maintaining the safe distance Ryder had drilled into her. "Want to try something new today?" she asked. "I brought you an apple. Ryder said it's okay to offer treats if you're calm. Are you calm?" She pulled the apple from her pocket, holding it flat on her palm, the way Ryder had taught her. Devil's nostrils flared, catching the scent. He stretched his neck toward her, muscles tensing, and Eliza's instinct screamed at her to pull back. But she held steady, trusting the connection they'd been building. Devil's lips were surprisingly gentle as they plucked the apple from her palm. He crunched it loudly, his eyes half closing with pleasure. It was such a normal horse-like thing to do that Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. "There you are," she whispered. "There's the horse underneath all that pain." "I'll be damned." Eliza turned to find Ryder standing a few yards away, his expression one of absolute astonishment. "He took food from your hand, he's never, in 3 years, I've never seen him accept anything from a person." "He's learning to trust," Eliza said simply. "No," Ryder corrected, moving closer. "He's learning to trust you. There's a difference." He studied Devil with new eyes, seeing the subtle changes in the stallion's posture, the absence of the constant tension that had defined him. "You've got a gift, Eliza. I didn't want to believe it, but I can't deny what I'm seeing." The praise made Eliza's cheeks warm. "You're the one who taught me everything. I taught you mechanics, how to move, what to do. But this," Ryder gestured to Devil, "this is something else. This is connection, and you can't teach that." Over the following days, they pushed the boundaries a little further. Ryder showed Eliza how to enter the stall safely, always leaving an escape route, never cornering the horse. The first time she stepped inside with Devil loose, her entire body shook with adrenaline. But the stallion simply watched her, tense but not aggressive, allowing her presence. "Good boy," Eliza murmured, keeping her voice low and soothing. "Such a good boy. I'm not going to hurt you." She stayed only a minute before backing out, following Ryder's instruction not to overstay her welcome. But it was a start. Each day, she'd go in a little longer, move a little closer. Devil's tolerance grew, his acceptance deepening. Then came the day Ryder suggested they try touching him. "Use the back of your hand first," he instructed, demonstrating on Buck in the next stall. "Less threatening than fingers. Start at the shoulder. It's a strong part of the horse, not as vulnerable as the face or legs. And watch his body language. The second he tenses, you back off." Eliza's mouth went dry as she entered Devil's stall that afternoon. The stallion stood in the center, watching her approach with dark, knowing eyes. She could feel his power, the coiled strength in his muscles, the fact that he could kill her with a single kick if he chose. "It's just me," Eliza said, her voice steady despite her fear. "Just me, like always. I'm going to touch you now. Please don't kill me for it." She extended her hand slowly, the back of it facing Devil's shoulder. The last few inches felt like miles. Her hand shook, her breath came in short gasps, and time seemed to slow to a crawl. Then her knuckles brushed his coat. Devil's skin twitched at the contact, and every muscle in Eliza's body tensed, ready to run. But the stallion didn't move. He stood still, tolerating her touch, his breathing steady and calm. Eliza's vision blurred with tears as she gently stroked his shoulder. The coat was softer than she'd expected, warm beneath her trembling hand. 3 months ago, this horse had been a monster in her mind, a killer to be feared and avoided. Now he stood beneath her touch like any other horse seeking connection and comfort. "That's my boy," she whispered. "That's my brave, beautiful boy." From outside the stall, she heard Ryder's sharp intake of breath. When she glanced at him, she saw wonder on his face, and something else. Pain, sharp and fresh, as if watching Devil accept Eliza's touch had reopened old wounds. Eliza withdrew her hand and left the stall, her legs weak with released adrenaline. Ryder stood frozen, staring at Devil with an expression that broke Eliza's heart. "He never let James touch him either," Ryder said quietly. "My brother worked with him for months, and Devil never calmed down, never stopped fighting. James died still believing he could save that horse, and I thought he'd died for nothing." Ryder's voice cracked. "But maybe he just needed more time, or maybe he just needed someone who understood his pain," Eliza finished gently. Ryder nodded, unable to speak. They stood in silence, watching Devil through the stall bars. The stallion had returned to his hay, eating peacefully, as if accepting human touch was the most natural thing in the world. That night, over supper in Ryder's kitchen, the mood was different than it had ever been. Usually, they ate in silence or with minimal conversation. But tonight, Ryder seemed compelled to talk, to share memories he'd kept locked away for too long. "James was younger than me by 4 years," he said, pushing food around his plate. "Always had a gentle soul, even as a kid. He'd bring home injured birds, orphaned rabbits, any creature that needed help. Our father said he was too soft for ranch life, but James proved him wrong. He had a way with animals that I've never seen matched, until you." Eliza didn't know what to say to that, so she simply listened. "When he found Devil at that auction, I told him it was a mistake. Told him that horse was too damaged, too dangerous. We fought about it for weeks." Ryder's jaw clenched. "Last real conversation we had was an argument about whether Devil could be saved. James said every creature deserved a chance at redemption. I said, some things are too broken to fix." "You were both right," Eliza said softly. "Some things are too broken to fix alone, but maybe not too broken to fix with help." Ryder looked at her, really looked at her, and Eliza saw recognition in his eyes. He was seeing her clearly for the first time, not as the charity case dumped on his doorstep, not as cheap labor, but as a person, someone who'd survived her own breaking and come out stronger. "I was wrong about you," Ryder admitted. "When you first arrived, I saw a soft city girl who'd quit within a week. I was wrong about almost everything, about your strength, your determination, your ability to learn, and I'm sorry for that." The apology stunned Eliza into silence. In her entire life, no adult had ever apologized to her for misjudging her. "You don't have to," she started. "Yes, I do," Ryder interrupted, "because you've earned more than my silence or my grudging acceptance. You've earned respect, and I should have given it to you sooner." Eliza felt something shift in her chest, some weight she'd carried for so long she'd forgotten it was there. Respect. She'd never realized how desperately she'd needed to hear that word until Ryder spoke it. "Thank you," she whispered. They finished the meal in comfortable silence, and when Eliza returned to the bunkhouse that night, she felt different, lighter, like she'd finally proven something to herself that had nothing to do with anyone else's opinion. The work with Devil continued, each day bringing small victories. He began to seek out Eliza's presence, moving to the front of his stall when he heard her voice. He accepted grooming with patience that shocked Ryder. He even tolerated a halter, though they didn't push him to lead yet. "We're moving too fast," Ryder cautioned one afternoon. "Building trust is one thing. Asking him to submit to human direction is another. We need to slow down." But Eliza could feel Devil's readiness, his desire to break free of the prison his trauma had created. What if we just try? She suggested. Just see if he'll take a few steps with me. If he resists, we stop immediately. Ryder hesitated, then nodded. Your judgment's been sound so far, but I'm staying close, and we abort the second anything feels wrong. They entered the stall together, Eliza holding a lead rope. Devil watched them with calm eyes, his posture relaxed. Eliza clipped the rope to his halter with steady hands, then stepped to his shoulder. Walk with me, she said softly, applying gentle pressure to the lead. For a moment, Devil stood frozen, and Eliza could feel the conflict in him, the instinct to fight warring with the new trust they'd built. Then, slowly, he took a step forward, then another. He followed Eliza in a small circle inside the stall, his movements cautious but willing. That's it, Eliza breathed. Perfect. Such a good boy. They completed the circle and Eliza immediately released the pressure, rewarding Devil with scratches on his favorite spot, just behind his ear. The stallion leaned into her touch, his eyes half closed with contentment. Ryder stood against the stall wall, his expression one of disbelief. I never thought I'd see him like this. Calm, trusting, almost normal. He's not normal, Eliza said, stroking Devil's neck. He's extraordinary. He survived things that would have broken most horses completely. The fact that he can trust again, that he can let go of even a fraction of his fear, that's remarkable. Like someone else I know, Ryder said quietly. Eliza met his eyes and saw the understanding there. He knew she wasn't just talking about Devil. She was talking about herself, about every person who'd ever been broken and dismissed as worthless, about the possibility of transformation through patience and connection. That night, Eliza lay awake in the bunkhouse, staring at the ceiling and thinking about how far she'd come. 4 months ago, she'd been a frightened girl, convinced of her own inadequacy, sent to the frontier as punishment for being too expensive to keep. Now she was someone who could gentle savage horses and earn the respect of a man like Ryder Callahan. But the victory felt incomplete, because no matter how much she'd accomplished, no matter how much she'd proven herself, she was still operating under the shadow of the contract. In 2 months, her term would be up. And then what? Would Ryder ask her to stay, or would he consider their agreement fulfilled and send her on her way? The uncertainty gnawed at her, but Eliza pushed it aside. She'd learned to take things one day at a time on the frontier. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, and she'd face them when they came. What she didn't know was that those challenges would arrive far sooner than she expected, and they would threaten everything she'd built. The visitors arrived on a Saturday morning in early February, their wagon wheels crunching through frozen mud as they rolled up to the ranch. Eliza heard them before she saw them. Male voices, loud and brash, cutting through the quiet morning air. She was in the barn grooming Molly, and something about those voices made her shoulders tense instinctively. Ryder emerged from the house, wiping his hands on a cloth. "Hayes!" he called out, his tone neutral but not warm. "Didn't expect to see you until spring." "Couldn't wait that long, Callahan," a heavy-set man replied, climbing down from the wagon with the help of 2 younger men who bore enough resemblance to be his sons. "Heard some interesting rumors about your place. Thought we'd come see for ourselves." Eliza peered around the barn door, taking in the newcomers. The older man, Hayes, had the weathered face of someone who'd spent decades working the land, but his eyes held a cruel amusement that put Eliza immediately on edge. The 2 younger men shared his build and his smirk, looking around the ranch with expressions that suggested they were cataloging its weaknesses. "What rumors would those be?" Ryder asked, crossing his arms. "That you've hired yourself some help. Girl from the charity house," they said. Hayes's eyes swept the property, landing on Eliza before she could duck back into the barn. "There she is. Come on out here, girl. Let's get a look at you." Eliza's instinct was to refuse, to stay hidden in the barn. But Ryder glanced back at her and gave a subtle nod, and she understood that hiding would only make things worse. She set down her grooming brush and walked out into the yard, keeping her chin up and her expression neutral. Hayes looked her up and down with an assessment that made her skin crawl. "Well, I'll be damned. They weren't lying about her being thick. How much you paying to feed this one, Callahan? Must cost you a fortune." The casual cruelty of the comment hit Eliza like a physical blow. She'd lost considerable weight over the past 4 months through hard labor and simple food, her body transforming into something lean and strong. But clearly, Hayes didn't see strength. He saw only an opportunity to demean. "Miss Hart earns her keep," Ryder said, his voice cold. "More than I can say for some." Hayes laughed, missing or ignoring the insult. "I'm sure she does. Heard you've been trying to gentle that killer horse of yours too. That true? You got this girl working with Devil?" "My horses and my staff are my business," Ryder replied. "Now don't be like that. We're all friends here." Hayes moved closer to Ryder, dropping his voice to what he probably thought was a confidential tone, but Eliza could still hear every word. "Truth is, I'm worried about you, Callahan. Worried you're making decisions out of desperation rather than sense. A charity case and a killer horse? That's not the mark of a man thinking clearly." "I appreciate your concern," Ryder said flatly, "but it's misplaced." "Is it?" Hayes gestured to his sons. "Boys and I brought our horses that need boarding for the next month. Thought we'd check in on them regular-like. Make sure they're being properly cared for." His eyes slid to Eliza again. "No offense to your girl here, but some of these animals are valuable. Can't have inexperienced hands damaging them." Eliza felt heat rise in her cheeks. She wanted to tell Hayes exactly how experienced she'd become. Wanted to list every horse she'd successfully handled, every task she'd mastered. But Ryder's expression told her to stay quiet, to let him handle it. "The horses here receive excellent care," Ryder said. "Always have. If you want to board your animals, fine. Standard rates apply, but I won't tolerate you or your sons harassing my staff. Clear?" Hayes held up his hands in mock surrender. "Wouldn't dream of it. Just making conversation." He turned to his sons. "Unload the horses, boys, and be careful. Some of them are a little spirited." The next hour was tense and uncomfortable. Hayes's sons brought in 3 horses, all of them high-strung and difficult. They made a show of giving Eliza and Ryder detailed instructions on each animal's care, speaking slowly as if to children, adding snide comments about making sure the girl didn't mess anything up. Eliza bit her tongue so hard she tasted blood. She took notes on each horse's needs, nodded politely, and refused to give them the satisfaction of seeing her anger. But inside she was seething. When the Hayes family finally left, their wagon disappearing down the road, Eliza let out a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. "Ignore them," Ryder said quietly. "Hayes is a miserable bastard who gets his kicks from making other people feel small. His opinion means nothing." "Then why let them board here?" Eliza asked, unable to keep the frustration from her voice. "Because I need the money," Ryder admitted bluntly. "Ranch is barely breaking even. Can't afford to turn away paying customers no matter how much I'd like to." He looked at her, his expression softening slightly. "But I meant what I said. They harass you again. I'll end the arrangement. Some things aren't worth the cost." The fact that Ryder would sacrifice income to protect her dignity meant more to Eliza than he probably realized, but it also highlighted something she'd been trying not to think about: the ranch's financial struggles. Ryder worked constantly, maintained everything himself, took on as many boarding contracts as he could manage. And still, it wasn't quite enough. Over the next 2 weeks, the Hayes family made good on their promise to check on their horses regularly. Too regularly. They'd show up at odd hours, always finding some excuse to criticize or comment. The older son, Marcus, seemed to take particular pleasure in watching Eliza work, making observations about her technique that were just barely polite enough to avoid open confrontation. "You're holding that brush wrong," he'd say. "Surprised Callahan hasn't taught you proper form." Or, "That horse looks a little thin. You sure you're feeding him enough? Hate to think my father's money is being wasted." Each comment was designed to undermine, to suggest incompetence, to make Eliza doubt herself. And the worst part was that some of them hit on insecurities she hadn't fully conquered. Was she doing something wrong? Was she truly as capable as Ryder seemed to think, or was she just lucky? Ryder noticed the pattern and confronted Hayes directly during one visit. "Your horses are being cared for properly. If you can't trust that, take them elsewhere." But Hayes just smiled. "Now, Callahan, I'm just being thorough. Surely you can understand that. Besides, my boys are learning a lot watching your operation here. Real educational." The mockery in his tone was unmistakable, and Eliza saw Ryder's jaw clench. But he said nothing, and the Hayes family continued their unwelcome visits. The situation came to a head on a Wednesday afternoon. Eliza was working with Devil in his stall. running through their daily routine of grooming and gentle handling. The stallion had progressed remarkably. He now tolerated being haltered, led, and even groomed without any signs of aggression. They'd been working on desensitization, getting him comfortable with different objects and sounds, preparing him for the day when Ryder thought it might be safe to attempt riding. Eliza was so focused on Devil that she didn't hear the barn door open. Didn't notice she had an audience until a mocking voice cut through her concentration. "Well, would you look at that? The charity girl thinks she's a horse trainer." Eliza's head snapped up to find Marcus Hayes leaning against Devil's stall door, his brother Tyler beside him. Both wore expressions of barely concealed amusement. "You shouldn't be here," Eliza said firmly, moving to position herself between the men and Devil. The stallion's ears flicked back, sensing the change in atmosphere. "Mr. Callahan doesn't allow visitors in the barn without permission." "Relax," Marcus said, waving a dismissive hand. "We just came to check on our horses. Saw you in here playing with the killer and thought we'd watch. Pretty brave of you, considering what that beast did to Callahan's brother." "Devil is not a beast," Eliza said, keeping her voice low and calm for the horse's sake. "And I need to ask you to leave. You're making him nervous." Tyler laughed. "Making him nervous? That horse is a menace. Should have been put down years ago. Everyone knows it. Only reason Callahan keeps him is he's too sentimental to do what needs doing." Devil shifted restlessly, picking up on the hostile energy. Eliza placed a calming hand on his shoulder, feeling the tension in his muscles. "Please leave. Now." "Or what?" Marcus challenged, stepping closer to the stall door. "You'll tell your boss? Maybe you'll cry? That's what charity girls do, isn't it? Cry and beg for help?" The words were designed to wound, and they succeeded. For just a moment, Eliza was back in the charity house, surrounded by girls who'd perfected the art of verbal cruelty, who'd known exactly which words would cut deepest. The old Eliza would have shrunk from the confrontation, would have made herself small and hoped the bullies would lose interest. But Eliza wasn't that girl anymore. "Get out of this barn," she said, her voice steel. "You're not welcome here, and you're upsetting the animals." Tyler's eyes narrowed. "You don't give us orders. You're just some fat orphan Callahan hired out of pity. Probably keeps you around because he's lonely, if you know what I mean." The insinuation was vile, and Eliza felt rage flash through her. But before she could respond, Devil made the decision for her. The stallion lunged at the stall door with a scream that made both Hayes brothers jump backward. His teeth snapped inches from Marcus's face, his eyes rolling white with fury. "Control that damn horse!" Marcus shouted, stumbling over his own feet in his haste to get away. "I told you to leave," Eliza said coldly. "He's protecting me. And unlike you, he knows the difference between a threat and a friend." The brothers retreated quickly, throwing threats over their shoulders about telling their father, about getting Eliza fired, about having the horse destroyed for being dangerous. But Eliza barely heard them. She was focused entirely on Devil, who was still agitated, still ready to defend against perceived danger. "Easy, boy," she murmured, stroking his neck. "They're gone. You're safe. I'm safe. Thank you for protecting me, but you're safe now." It took several minutes for Devil to calm down, for the rage to drain from his eyes and his breathing to return to normal. When he finally lowered his head and leaned into Eliza's touch, she wrapped her arms around his neck and let herself feel the full weight of what had just happened. Devil had defended her. The horse everyone called a killer had recognized a threat and acted to protect her. It was the ultimate proof of the bond they'd built, but Eliza knew it would be twisted by people like the Hayes family. They wouldn't see a protective horse. They'd see a dangerous animal who'd nearly attacked them. She was proven right within the hour. Ryder stormed into the barn, his face dark with anger. What happened with the Hayes brothers? Eliza explained the confrontation, leaving nothing out. Ryder listened in silence, his jaw getting tighter with each detail. "They're saying Devil tried to kill them," Ryder said when she finished. "That you provoked him. That you're not competent to be around horses, especially dangerous ones. Hayes is threatening to pull his boarding contract and spread word that my ranch is unsafe." "I didn't provoke anything," Eliza said hotly. "They came in here making crude comments, insulting both of us. Devil sensed the hostility and reacted. He was protecting me, not attacking them." "I believe you," Ryder said, But what we believe doesn't matter if Hayes convinces other ranchers that I'm running a dangerous operation. I can't afford to lose more business, Eliza. The ranch is already on thin ice financially. The implication hung in the air between them, unspoken but clear. The ranch needed money. The Hayes family provided money, and Eliza was jeopardizing that income. "So what are you saying?" Eliza asked, her voice small. "That I should have let them insult me? That I should have just stood there and taken it?" "No," Ryder said firmly. "I'm saying this situation is complicated, and I don't know what the right answer is." He ran a hand through his hair, looking older and more tired than Eliza had ever seen him. "I don't want you to leave. You've proven yourself 100 times over. But if Hayes makes good on his threats, if he convinces people this ranch is dangerous, we could lose everything." "Then I'll leave," Eliza said, the words tearing at her throat. "I'll pack tonight. You can tell Hayes it was your decision, that you fired me for incompetence. Protect the ranch's reputation." Ryder's head snapped up. "That's not what I'm asking." "But it's what you need," Eliza countered. "I understand business, Mr. Callahan. I understand survival. And I understand that sometimes people like me have to be sacrificed so others can get by." "You're not being sacrificed," Ryder said, his voice rough with emotion. "And you're not people like you, whatever the hell that means. You're Eliza Hart, the toughest hand I've ever worked with, the only person who's managed to reach that stallion, and someone who's become—" He stopped abruptly, as if he'd said more than he intended. "Become what?" Eliza pressed, her heart pounding. Ryder looked away. "Someone I've come to depend on. Not just for the work, but for the company, the perspective, the reminder that not everything broken stays broken." The confession hung between them, fragile and profound. Eliza had known she'd earned Ryder's respect, but this was something else. This was connection, possibly even the beginnings of something deeper. Before either could speak again, the sound of wagon wheels interrupted them. They both turned to see not the Hayes family, but a familiar black carriage rolling up to the ranch house. Eliza's stomach dropped. She'd recognize that carriage anywhere. It belonged to the Westridge Charity House. Mrs. Brennan stepped down from the carriage with the help of a driver, her sharp features set in an expression of grim satisfaction. Behind her came a portly man in an expensive suit, Mr. Thaddeus Werner, the Charity House's primary benefactor and board chairman. "Mr. Callahan," Mrs. Brennan called out, her voice carrying across the yard. "We need to speak with you regarding Eliza Hart's contract." Ryder and Eliza exchanged a glance, then walked out to meet the visitors. Eliza's heart hammered against her ribs. 4 months of her contract remained. Why were they here? "Mrs. Brennan," Ryder said, his tone carefully neutral. "Mr. Werner, this is unexpected." "I'm sure it is," Werner said, his voice oily and smooth. "We've received some disturbing reports about the conditions here. Reports that suggest Miss Hart has been placed in dangerous situations, working with violent animals without proper supervision or training." Eliza's blood ran cold. Hayes, he'd gone straight to the charity house with his version of events. "Those reports are false," Ryder said firmly. "Miss Hart has received extensive training and has performed her duties admirably." "According to our sources," Mrs. Brennan interjected, "she was nearly killed by a stallion known to be dangerous, a stallion that previously killed a man. Is that true, Mr. Callahan?" Ryder's jaw clenched. "Devil has never attacked Miss Hart. She's been working with him successfully for weeks." "Unsuccessfully, according to our information," Werner said. "The horse attempted to attack 2 witnesses just yesterday. Witnesses of good standing in the community, I might add." "Those witnesses provoked the situation," Eliza said, unable to stay silent any longer. "They came into the barn uninvited, made inappropriate comments, and upset the horse. Devil was defending me, not attacking anyone." Mrs. Brennan's smile was cold. "And therein lies the problem, Eliza. You've been given responsibilities far beyond your capabilities. You were sent here to learn basic horse handling, not to rehabilitate dangerous animals. The charity house cannot, in good conscience, allow you to remain in such a hazardous situation." "The contract specifies 6 months," Ryder said, his voice hard. "Miss Hart has fulfilled her obligations. There's no legal basis for early termination." Actually, Werner said, producing a document from his coat, the contract includes a safety clause. If the charity house determines that the placement poses unacceptable risk to the ward's well-being, we reserve the right to remove her immediately. He held out the paper. I believe you'll find your signature on page 3, Mr. Callahan. Ryder snatched the document and scanned it quickly. Eliza watched his face fall as he found the clause in question. It had probably seemed like standard legal language when he'd signed it, never imagining it would be weaponized against them. This is ridiculous, Ryder said. Eliza is safer here than she'd be in most places. I've trained her personally. She's competent, skilled, and has excellent judgment. Your personal feelings are noted, Mrs. Brennan said dismissively. But the decision has been made. Eliza will return with us today. We'll arrange alternative placement in a more suitable environment. Alternative placement? Eliza echoed, her voice hollow. You mean you'll send me somewhere else? Another ranch? Another position? Mrs. Brennan's expression flickered with something that might have been discomfort. The charity house's resources are limited. At 16, you're nearly aged out of our care. We'll do what we can, but I can't make promises. The truth hit Eliza like a sledgehammer. There would be no alternative placement. They were cutting her loose, washing their hands of the expense and liability she represented. She'd be sent back to town with no job, no prospects, and no options except whatever charity or degradation she could scrape together. No, Ryder said flatly. Everyone turned to look at him. No? Werner repeated, his eyebrows raised. Mr. Callahan, this isn't a negotiation. The contract says you can remove her if her well-being is at risk, Ryder interrupted. But Eliza's well-being is not at risk here. She's thriving. She's learned more in 4 months than most ranch hands learn in years. And I won't stand by while you yank her out of the first stable situation she's probably ever had just because some vindictive neighbor decided to cause trouble. Mr. Callahan, Mrs. Brennan said, her voice sharpening. Your attachment to the girl is noted, but it doesn't change the facts. The charity house has a responsibility. You have a responsibility to protect the children in your care, Ryder shot back, not to use them as disposable labor and discard them when they become inconvenient. You sent Eliza here under false pretenses, lied about her experience, and set her up to fail. The fact that she succeeded despite your sabotage doesn't give you the right to destroy what she's built. Werner's expression hardened. I understand you're upset, Mr. Callahan, but insulting the institution won't change the outcome. Miss Hart will be leaving with us today. You can be compensated for the early termination if you wish, though I'd argue that keeping a dangerous animal negates any claim you might have. I'm not leaving. Eliza's voice cut through the argument, quiet but absolute. All eyes turned to her. I'm not leaving, she repeated, stronger now. I have 2 months left on my contract. I intend to fulfill it. And if the charity house tries to force me to leave, I'll refuse. You can't refuse, Mrs. Brennan said, her tone icy. You're a ward of the charity house. We have legal authority. I'm 16, Eliza interrupted, old enough to make my own decisions. And I decide to stay. Werner stepped forward, his expression hardening into something ugly. Miss Hart, I don't think you understand your situation. If you refuse to come with us, we'll have no choice but to wash our hands of you entirely. No future placement, no support, no assistance of any kind. You'll be on your own. I'm already on my own, Eliza said. I have been since the day I arrived here. The charity house never cared what happened to me. You sent me to the frontier hoping I'd disappear, hoping I'd become someone else's problem. Well, congratulations. I am someone else's concern now. Mr. Callahan's. And unless he tells me to leave, I'm staying. She looked at Ryder, and in that moment, everything they'd been dancing around for months crystallized into perfect clarity. She wasn't just his employee anymore. She was his partner, his equal, someone he valued not for her labor but for herself. And she needed him to say it, to claim that connection in front of these people who'd spent her whole life telling her she was worthless. Ryder met her eyes, and she saw the decision form. Eliza stays, he said firmly. The contract can end right now if the charity house insists, but she stays on this ranch, as my employee, my partner, whatever she chooses. Her place here isn't contingent on your approval. Mrs. Brennan's face flushed with anger. This is highly irregular, Mr. Callahan. The girl has no means, no family, no prospects beyond this ranch. You're doing her no favors by encouraging this defiance. I'm giving her what she's earned, Ryder said. A choice. Something your institution never bothered to provide. Werner and Mrs. Brennan exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. Finally, Werner nodded shortly. Very well. The charity house hereby terminates its contract with you, Mr. Callahan, and relinquishes all authority over Eliza Hart. She is no longer our responsibility or concern. We'll send the necessary paperwork to make it official. Fine, Ryder said. Don't say we didn't warn you, Mrs. Brennan added, her voice dripping with false concern. When she fails, when she proves to be exactly the burden we always knew her to be, remember that you chose this. Get off my property, Ryder said quietly, and there was something in his voice that made both visitors take a step back. Now. They left without another word, climbing back into their carriage and disappearing down the road. Eliza watched them go, feeling like she'd just severed the last thread connecting her to her old life. She was free, completely, terrifyingly free. Eliza, but, Ryder started. Thank you, she said, her voice shaking. Thank you for standing up for me, for giving me a choice. You earned it, Ryder said simply. Then, with a hint of dry humor, though I'm not sure what I've gotten myself into, keeping on a hand who talks back and harbors dangerous animals. Eliza laughed, the sound breaking the tension. Guess you'll find out. They stood in the yard together, the winter sun breaking through the clouds, and Eliza felt something she'd never experienced before. Not just safety, not just acceptance, but belonging. This ranch, this harsh and beautiful place, had become home. And Ryder Callahan, the stern cowboy who'd taken in an unwanted girl and watched her transform, had become something she'd never expected to find. Family. The days following the charity house's departure carried a strange mixture of relief and uncertainty. Eliza was free, truly free for the first time in her life, but freedom came with questions that had no easy answers. What was her role now? She wasn't bound by contract anymore, wasn't obligated to stay. So why was she staying? And more importantly, did Ryder actually want her here, or had he simply defended her out of principle? These thoughts circled through Eliza's mind as she worked, but she pushed them aside. The horses still needed care, the barn still needed cleaning, and Devil's training couldn't be interrupted just because her legal status had changed. So she fell back into routine, finding comfort in the familiar rhythm of ranch work. But Ryder was different, more careful with his words, more hesitant in his instructions. As if he was suddenly aware that Eliza could walk away at any moment and wasn't sure how to navigate that reality. 3 days after the confrontation, he finally addressed it over breakfast. We should talk about your situation, Ryder said, setting down his coffee cup. About what happens now? Eliza's stomach nodded. Here it came. The conversation where he'd explained that while he appreciated her work, he couldn't afford to keep her on permanently, that she'd need to find another position, another place. She braced herself for the familiar pain of rejection. I can't pay you much, Ryder continued, not meeting her eyes. Ranch barely makes enough to support one person, let alone two. But I can offer room, board, and a small wage. Enough to save, maybe. Build towards something. Eliza blinked, thrown completely off balance. You want me to stay? If you want to, Ryder said quickly. No obligation. No contract, just honest work for honest pay. But I understand if you'd rather find something better, somewhere with more opportunity. There's nothing better, Eliza interrupted. Nothing I want more than to stay here, if you'll have me. Ryder finally looked at her, and the relief in his expression was unmistakable. Then it's settled. You stay as long as you want, as my partner in this place. Partner. The words settled into Eliza's chest with a warmth that had nothing to do with the coffee she was drinking. Not employee, not hired hand, but partner. Equal. There's one condition, Ryder added, his expression turning serious. The Hayes situation isn't resolved. They're still spreading talk about the ranch being dangerous, about Devil being a threat. If we're going to salvage the ranch's reputation, we need to prove them wrong. How? Eliza asked, though part of her already knew the answer. We finish what we started with Devil, Ryder said. We prove he's not a killer anymore, that he can be ridden, controlled, trusted. It's the only way to silence the rumors. Eliza felt a thrill of fear and excitement course through her. They'd been building toward this for weeks, slowly preparing Devil for the possibility of being ridden again. But actually doing it was another matter entirely. The stallion had killed a man the last time someone tried to ride him. The risk was enormous. When? She asked. Soon, Ryder said. But we do it right, carefully. And if at any point it feels wrong, we stop. I won't lose you the way I lost James. The raw emotion in his voice made Eliza's throat tight. She nodded, unable to speak past the lump of feeling lodged there. Over the next 2 weeks, they intensified Devil's training. Ryder brought out saddle blankets, letting the stallion smell them, dragging them across his back until Devil stood calmly beneath the unfamiliar weight. Then came the saddle itself, placed gently on his back with no girth, just the feel of leather against his coat. Devil tolerated it all with remarkable patience. There were moments of tension, times when his old fear and rage threatened to resurface, but Eliza's voice always brought him back. She'd talk him through each new challenge, her words a constant reassurance that he was safe, that no one would hurt him, that this was different from whatever trauma he'd endured before. He trusts you completely, Ryder observed one afternoon, watching as Eliza cinched the saddle girth for the first time. Devil's ears flicked nervously, but he stood still, accepting the pressure. I've never seen anything like it. He knows I understand, Eliza said softly, stroking Devil's neck. We've both been broken by people who should have protected us. We both know what it's like to be seen as worthless, dangerous, beyond redemption. That kind of recognition goes deeper than training. Ryder was quiet for a long moment. You're not worthless, Eliza. You never were. I know that now, Eliza said, meeting his eyes. Thanks to you. And Devil knows it too, thanks to both of us. The day they chose for the first mounting attempt was clear and cold, the kind of sharp winter morning where every sound carried for miles. They'd invited no witnesses, told no one what they were planning. This was between them, Devil and the ghosts of the past that still haunted the ranch. Ryder insisted on being the one to mount first. If something goes wrong, I'd rather it be me than you. And if something goes wrong, I'd rather you alive to help me figure out what comes next, Eliza countered. Besides, he trusts me more. You know that. Ryder's jaw worked, but he couldn't argue with the truth. Devil had bonded with Eliza in a way he'd never bonded with anyone, even James. If anyone had a chance of riding him successfully, it was her. They led Devil into the round pen, a controlled space where he couldn't bolt far if panic seized him. The stallion seemed to sense something significant was happening. His movements were tense, his ears constantly swiveling, but he stayed calm under Eliza's steady hand. Easy, boy, Eliza murmured, running her hand along his neck. Just like we practiced. Nothing different, nothing scary, just you and me. She checked the girth one more time, adjusted the stirrups to her height, then took a deep breath. This was it. The moment everything they'd worked for would either prove itself or fall apart spectacularly. Ryder stood nearby, his body coiled with tension, ready to intervene if Devil showed any sign of violence. You're sure about this? No, Eliza admitted, but I'm doing it anyway. She placed her foot in the stirrup, letting Devil feel her weight shift. He sidestepped nervously, but didn't bolt. Good. She counted to 3 in her head, then swung her leg over his back. For one frozen moment, Eliza sat astride Devil, feeling the incredible power of the horse beneath her, waiting for him to explode. The stallion's entire body went rigid, every muscle tensed. His head came up, his nostrils flared wide. Eliza could feel the decision forming in him, fight or accept, violence or trust. Please, she whispered, leaning forward to press her face against his mane. Please remember me. Remember that I saved you. Remember that we're the same. Devil trembled beneath her, 3 years of trauma warring with months of patient rebuilding. Then, slowly, his head lowered. His muscles began to relax. He took one tentative step forward, then another, carrying Eliza around the pen with uncertain but willing strides. Eliza's vision blurred with tears. They'd done it. Devil was being ridden again, carrying a person on his back without rage or fear. The horse everyone had called a killer, the animal Ryder had kept alive out of guilt and memory, was proving that redemption was possible. She guided him gently around the pen, keeping her movements minimal, her voice constant and soothing. Devil responded to her cues with growing confidence, his steps becoming more assured. By the time Eliza finally dismounted, both she and the stallion were trembling with exhaustion and emotion. Ryder stood frozen, his face pale, his eyes suspiciously bright. James would have loved to see that, he said hoarsely. He always believed Devil could be saved, always believed patience and kindness could overcome anything. He was right, Eliza said, wrapping her arms around Devil's neck. The stallion leaned into her embrace, finally, fully trusting. He just didn't have enough time to prove it. They worked with Devil every day after that, building his confidence and training. Within a week, Eliza could ride him around the property. Within 2 weeks, he responded to basic commands: walk, trot, turn, stop. His transformation was nothing short of miraculous, and word began to spread. Ranchers who'd heard the Hayes family's rumors started showing up, curious to see the killer horse being ridden by a teenage girl. They watched in disbelief as Eliza put Devil through his paces, demonstrating his obedience and calm temperament. The horse, who'd once been the subject of fearful whispers, became something else entirely. Proof that even the most damaged creatures could heal with proper care. But the Hayes family wasn't ready to concede defeat. They showed up unannounced one Saturday morning, bringing with them half a dozen other ranchers as witnesses. "We heard the rumors," Hayes Sr. announced, climbing down from his wagon with theatrical slowness. "Heard you've been claiming that Devil horse is safe now. Thought we'd see for ourselves whether you're a miracle worker or just reckless." Eliza and Ryder exchanged glances. This was clearly meant to be a public humiliation. Hayes expecting Devil to fail, to prove his point that the horse was irredeemable and Eliza was incompetent. "Devil's training is progressing well," Ryder said carefully. "But he's still learning. This isn't a show." "Then make it one," Hayes challenged. "You want people to believe your ranch is safe? Prove it. Ride that horse in front of witnesses. Show us this miraculous transformation everyone's talking about." The other ranchers murmured among themselves, clearly intrigued by the challenge. Eliza could see the calculation in their eyes. If Devil really had been rehabilitated, it would be impressive. If he hadn't, they'd have front-row seats to a disaster. "Eliza doesn't have to prove anything to you," Ryder said, his voice hard. "Maybe not to me," Hayes agreed, "but to them? To everyone who's wondering whether to trust their animals to your care? I'd say she has everything to prove." He was right, and they all knew it. The ranch's reputation hung in the balance. Either Eliza demonstrated Devil's transformation convincingly, or the whispers about the dangerous ranch would continue, slowly strangling their business. "I'll do it," Eliza said quietly. "Eliza," Ryder started. "I'll do it," she repeated, louder now. "Not because Hayes demands it, but because Devil deserves to have people see what he's become. He's not a killer anymore. He's a horse who survived trauma and learned to trust again. People should see that." She walked toward the barn, feeling the weight of every eye on her. Her heart hammered against her ribs, but her hands were steady as she haltered Devil and led him out into the yard. The stallion seemed to sense the tension in the air, his movements becoming slightly more agitated. But when Eliza placed her hand on his shoulder and spoke softly to him, he calmed. "It's okay, boy," she murmured. "Just you and me. Just like always. These people don't matter. Only you and I matter." She saddled him carefully, taking her time despite the impatient shifting of the spectators. This wasn't about speed or showmanship. This was about trust, about the bond they'd built over months of patient work. When she finally mounted, Devil stood perfectly still, his ears pricked forward with interest rather than fear. Eliza could feel the collective intake of breath from the watching ranchers. They'd expected resistance, expected the horse to buck or bolt. Instead, he stood calm, waiting for her direction. Eliza guided Devil into a walk, then a trot, moving him in circles and figure-eights around the yard. The stallion responded to every cue, his movements fluid and controlled. There was no sign of the rage-filled animal who terrorized this ranch for years. In his place was a well-trained, responsive horse who clearly trusted his rider. But Eliza knew a simple demonstration wouldn't be enough. Hayes would find some way to dismiss it, to claim Devil was still dangerous under the surface. She needed something more definitive, something that would leave no room for doubt. She made a decision that was either brilliant or completely insane. Mr. Hayes, Eliza called out, bringing Devil to a halt. You have concerns about Devil's safety. I understand that. So I'm going to make you an offer. Hayes's eyes narrowed suspiciously. What kind of offer? You called me incompetent, said I was a charity case who didn't know horses. Here's your chance to prove it. Eliza gestured to Devil. Walk over here. Stand next to us. If Devil's really still dangerous, if my training is as worthless as you claim, surely he'll attack you. After all, you were one of the people who provoked him before. The color drained from Hayes's face. I'm not getting near that animal. Why not? Eliza pressed, keeping her voice calm. If you're right, if he's still a killer, you'd be vindicated. Everyone would see that I've been lying about his progress. Isn't that what you want? The trap was beautifully laid. If Hayes refused to approach, he'd be admitting his claims were exaggerated, that he'd been spreading false rumors out of spite. If he approached and nothing happened, it would prove Devil was truly rehabilitated. Either way, Eliza won. Hayes sputtered, looking to the other ranchers for support, but they were watching him with newfound skepticism. They could see the manipulation he'd been engaged in, the way he'd twisted a personal grudge into public safety concerns. This is ridiculous, Hayes finally managed. I'm not risking my life to satisfy your ego. My ego? Eliza repeated. I'm not the one who brought an audience to watch someone fail. I'm not the one spreading lies about a ranch and a horse because a girl stood up to my bullying sons. Her voice grew stronger, fed by months of suppressed anger. You wanted to humiliate me, to prove I was everything the charity house said I was. Worthless, incompetent, a burden. But I'm not those things. I never was. And Devil isn't a killer. He's a survivor. Just like me. She dismounted smoothly, keeping one hand on Devil's neck. The stallion stood calmly, his dark eyes watching the assembled crowd with interest but no aggression. Anyone here who wants to approach Devil is welcome to do so, Eliza announced. Touch him, examine him, satisfy yourselves that he's sound and safe. Or don't, and stop spreading rumors about things you don't understand. There was a long moment of silence. Then one of the ranchers, an older man named Cowboy, who'd known Ryder's father, stepped forward. He walked slowly toward Devil, his movements careful but not fearful. When he reached the stallion, he extended his hand, letting Devil sniff it, then stroked the horse's shoulder. Well, I'll be damned, Cowboy said, genuine wonder in his voice. This is the same horse that killed James Callahan? The same animal that's been a terror for 3 years? The same horse, Ryder confirmed, speaking for the first time since the challenge began. But he's not the same anymore. Eliza saw something in him that the rest of us missed, that his violence came from pain, not nature, and she had the patience and courage to help him heal. One by one, other ranchers approached. They touched Devil, spoke to him, examined his calm demeanor with growing amazement. The stallion accepted their attention with dignified patience, as if he understood that he was proving something important. Hayes remained rooted to his spot, his face mottled with anger and humiliation. His son stood beside him, equally unable to save face. They'd gambled on Eliza failing and lost spectacularly. Finally, Cowboy turned to address the group. I don't know about the rest of you, but I've seen enough. This ranch is safe, the horses are well cared for, and anyone who says otherwise is either ignorant or malicious. He looked pointedly at Hayes. I'll be moving my boarding contract here next month, Callahan. You've got my business. Other ranchers nodded in agreement, several of them approaching Ryder to discuss boarding arrangements or training services. The tide had turned completely. What Hayes had intended as Eliza's public failure had become her ultimate vindication. Hayes and his sons left without another word, their wagon wheels churning up dust as they fled. Eliza watched them go with a sense of profound satisfaction. She'd faced down her bullies and won, not through violence or cruelty, but through competence and courage. As the crowd dispersed, Ryder walked over to where Eliza stood with Devil. His expression was complicated, pride mixed with something deeper, something that made Eliza's heart skip. That was either the bravest or most foolish thing I've ever seen, he said quietly. Probably both, Eliza admitted, but it worked. It did more than work. You didn't just prove Devil's rehabilitation. You proved your own worth to everyone here. Ryder's hand came to rest on Devil's other shoulder, so that the three of them stood connected. You've transformed this ranch, Eliza. Not just the horses, but the whole place. It's alive again in a way it hasn't been since James died. We transformed it together, Eliza corrected. You gave me the tools and the knowledge. I just used them. No, Ryder said firmly. You gave me something I'd lost. Hope. The belief that broken things could be fixed, that second chances were possible. You reminded me why I do this work in the first place. They stood in comfortable silence, both stroking Devil's neck, the stallion content between them. The winter sun broke through the clouds, warming the frozen earth, and Eliza felt something shift inside her. This was her life now. Not a temporary stop, not a punishment to endure, but home. Over the following weeks, the ranch's fortunes improved dramatically. New boarding contracts came in, more than they could handle. Ranchers brought difficult horses for Eliza to train, having heard about her work with Devil. The Hayes family's reputation suffered in inverse proportion to the ranch's rise. People who'd believed their lies now viewed them with suspicion and contempt. Eliza and Ryder settled into a new rhythm, more equal than employer and employee, closer to true partners. They worked side by side during the day, planning the ranch's future over supper, falling into an easy companionship that felt like family. Neither spoke of it directly, but both felt the shift. One evening in early March, as winter finally began to loosen its grip on the frontier, Ryder called Eliza into his study. She found him sitting at his desk, a collection of papers spread before him. "I've been doing some thinking," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "About the ranch's future, about what happens next." Eliza's stomach clenched. Here it came, the conversation she'd been dreading. Now that the ranch was successful again, maybe Ryder didn't need her anymore. Maybe he'd saved enough to hire more experienced help. "The ranch is doing well," Ryder continued. "Better than it has in years. We're actually making a profit now, enough to expand. Maybe buy some breeding stock, invest in better equipment." He paused, seeming to gather his courage. "But I can't do it alone. I need a partner. A real partner with equal stake in the operation." Eliza blinked, certain she'd misheard. "What?" "I'm offering you a partnership," Ryder said, pushing a document across the desk. "Legal binding. You'd own half of everything, the land, the horses, the business, equal say in all decisions, equal share of the profits." "Ryder, I can't accept that," Eliza said, her mind reeling. "I haven't contributed enough to deserve—" "You've contributed everything that matters," Ryder interrupted. "This ranch was dying before you arrived. I was going through the motions, just surviving, waiting for the next disaster. You brought it back to life. You gave me a reason to build instead of just maintain." His gray eyes held hers with an intensity that made her breath catch. "You're not an employee, Eliza. You haven't been for a long time. You're family. And family takes care of family." Eliza's vision blurred with tears. Family. She'd spent 16 years without one, convinced she'd never belong anywhere, never be wanted. And now this gruff, damaged man was offering her not just a job or a home, but belonging, partnership, equality. "Are you sure?" she whispered. She eats. "Truly sure, because once I sign this, I'm not leaving, ever. This becomes my home, my life, my future." "I'm counting on it," Ryder said, and there was warmth in his voice that Eliza had never heard before. "Sign the papers, Eliza Hart. Become my partner. Help me build something that lasts." Eliza's hand shook as she picked up the pen. She read through the partnership agreement carefully. Ryder had been thorough, protecting her interests as carefully as his own. Everything split evenly, everything fair. She could barely believe it was real. She signed her name with a flourish, making it official. When she set down the pen, Ryder extended his hand across the desk. Eliza shook it, feeling the calluses that matched her own, the strength that had been built through the same hard work. "Welcome home, partner," Ryder said. "Thank you," Eliza managed, her throat tight with emotion. "For seeing me, for believing in me, for giving me a chance when everyone else had given up." "Thank you for saving my ranch," Ryder replied, "and for saving me." Spring arrived with sudden warmth, melting the last of the winter snow and painting the prairie with new grass. The ranch transformed along with the season. New horses arrived for training. The breeding program Ryder had dreamed of began to take shape. And through it all, Eliza and Ryder worked side by side, building something neither could have created alone. Devil became the ranch's showcase, the living proof of what patience and understanding could accomplish. Ranchers brought their most difficult horses to Eliza, trusting her gift for seeing past trauma to the animal beneath. She developed a reputation across the territory as someone who could gentle the ungentleable, who could reach horses others had given up on. One afternoon in late April, as Eliza was working with a nervous mare in the round pen, a familiar black carriage appeared on the road. Her heart sank as she recognized it, the charity house. But when the carriage stopped, it wasn't Mrs. Brennan who emerged. It was a young girl, perhaps 13, wearing clothes as threadbare as Eliza's had been months ago. Behind her, a charity house attendant helped her down with the same indifferent efficiency Eliza remembered too well. Ryder came out of the barn, saw the carriage, and his expression hardened. "We're not taking any more charity cases," he called out. "Find someone else." "Please," the attendant said, and Eliza was surprised to hear genuine pleading in her voice. "She has nowhere to go. The house is overcrowded, and she's difficult. No one else will take her, but we heard about Miss Hart, about how she succeeded here. We thought maybe—" Eliza walked over, studying the girl. She saw herself in those frightened eyes, that defensive posture, the way the girl held herself small, as if trying to take up less space in a world that had already told her she was too much. "What's your name?" Eliza asked gently. The girl looked up, startled to be addressed directly. "Sarah," she whispered. "I'm Eliza. I used to live at the charity house too." She saw recognition flicker in Sarah's eyes, and hope. "They sent me here thinking I'd fail, thinking I was worthless. They were wrong. Are they wrong about you too?" Sarah's chin came up slightly. "Yes, ma'am." Eliza looked at Ryder, saw the conflict in his face. They'd agreed no more charity cases, no more arrangements with the house that had treated them both so poorly. But they'd also built something here, something that could offer second chances to people who needed them. "She can stay," Eliza said quietly, "but not as a charity case, as an apprentice. We teach her the work, give her a real chance, treat her with the dignity everyone deserves." Ryder studied Eliza for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "Same terms as your partnership started. Room, board, training, and the opportunity to earn a place here. But no false promises, no lies about her experience. We start honest." The attendant nodded eagerly, producing papers. "The house agrees to those terms." "Thank you, Mr. Callahan. Miss Hart, you're giving her a chance no one else would." As the carriage pulled away, Sarah stood in the yard looking lost and terrified. Eliza remembered that feeling with perfect clarity. She walked over and placed a gentle hand on the girl's shoulder. "Come on," she said. "Let me introduce you to the horses. There's one in particular I think you should meet. His name is Devil, and he's going to teach you something important, that the world's judgment doesn't define you. Only your choices do." She led Sarah toward the barn, Ryder falling into step beside them. Devil's head appeared over his stall door, ears pricked with curiosity at the new arrival. The massive black stallion who'd once been called a killer now served as proof that transformation was possible, that patience and kindness could overcome even the deepest wounds. Sarah reached out a tentative hand toward Devil, and the horse lowered his head, allowing her touch. Eliza saw wonder bloom across the girl's face, the same wonder she'd felt months ago when she'd first connected with an animal who understood pain. "You're going to be okay here," Eliza told Sarah. "It won't be easy. The work is hard, and the learning curve is steep. But if you're willing to try, if you're willing to push past what everyone told you about yourself, you'll discover something amazing." "What's that?" Sarah asked, her voice small but curious. "That you're stronger than you ever imagined," Eliza said. "And that broken things aren't broken forever." Ryder caught Eliza's eye over Sarah's head, and the look they exchanged was full of shared understanding. They were building something here, something bigger than a successful ranch. They were creating a place where the unwanted could become essential, where the broken could heal, where second chances were more than just words. As the sun set over the frontier, painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson, Eliza stood in the barn doorway watching Sarah feed Devil his evening grain. The girl's hands were steady, her voice growing more confident with each word she spoke to the horse. Behind her, Ryder moved through the barn with practiced efficiency, his presence solid and reassuring. This was home. Not the place she'd been born, not the charity house that had raised her, but this harsh and beautiful ranch where she'd been tested and had emerged transformed, where a lonely cowboy had found renewed purpose, where a savage stallion had learned to trust again, and where a girl everyone called worthless had proven her extraordinary worth. Eliza Hart was no longer the unwanted orphan dumped at the frontier's edge. She was a partner, a trainer, a woman who'd taken her pain and turned it into purpose. She'd saved Devil, but in doing so, she'd also saved herself, and Ryder, and now young Sarah, and who knew how many others who would find their way to this place seeking redemption. The black stallion raised his head from the grain bucket and looked at Eliza, his dark eyes calm and knowing. She walked over and pressed her forehead to his, feeling the warmth of his breath, the steady beat of his heart. "We did it, boy," she whispered. "We proved them all wrong." Devil snorted softly, then returned to his grain, content in the knowledge that he was safe, valued, home, just like the girl who'd saved him, just like the man who'd given them both a chance, just like the new girl learning that her story didn't have to end the way everyone predicted. The ranch hummed with life as darkness fell. Horses settling for the night, the creak of barn doors, the distant howl of wind across the prairie. And through it all, Eliza felt a peace she'd never known, the bone-deep certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new horses to train, new work to be done. But tonight, standing in the barn she'd helped build into something successful, surrounded by animals she'd learned to understand and people who valued her, Eliza allowed herself to simply exist in the moment, to feel the weight of her transformation, the magnitude of her journey from worthless charity case to essential partner. She'd been sent to the frontier to fail. Instead, she'd found her purpose. She'd been dumped on a struggling ranch with lies about her abilities. Instead, she'd discovered abilities she never knew she possessed. She'd been told she was too expensive to keep, too difficult, too much trouble. Instead, she'd become irreplaceable. The unwanted girl had become the heart of the ranch. The savage stallion had become a symbol of hope. And the grieving cowboy had found his way back to living instead of merely surviving. It was more than Eliza had ever dared dream possible. And as she closed up the barn for the night, checking each stall one final time, she knew with absolute certainty that this was just the beginning. There would be more horses to save, more people to help, more barriers to break. But whatever came next, she'd face it with Devil's courage, Ryder's steady support, and her own hard-won strength. The girl they'd sent away as a joke had become the woman who transformed lives, including her own. And that was a story worth living.